Hello, friends. The following is an excerpt from my latest book, National Park Mysteries and Disappearances, Volume 1, The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, from the chapter titled Of Wild Men and Feral Cannibals. Now, for decades, tales of mysterious people inhabiting the deep woods of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park have persisted. These range all the way from reports of hairy wild men to entire families or groups of inbred feral cannibals. For some theorists, shall we say, these wild feral people are said to account for the unexplained disappearances in the national park. In particular, they've been blamed for the disappearance of young Dennis Martin, the 6-year-old boy who vanished near Cades Cove area in June of 1969. A cryptic YouTube channel named South Force 10 elaborates on this theory and even claims to have inside knowledge, stating that some of his relatives in the area were hired by the government to hunt these people at one time. Even retired park ranger and legendary tracker Dwight McCarter, who was the lead in the Dennis Martin disappearance and many others during his long career, admit that there are wild men who live deep within the recesses of the national park. Some claim that these wild men are in fact the cryptid creature also known as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Now, there have been Bigfoot sightings throughout the whole of Appalachia, so if the creature does indeed exist, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park would be the perfect area for it or them to inhabit. The Cherokee have legends and stories of these, what they called hairy giants, who were already inhabitants of the land before the Cherokee came into the area thousands of years ago. Other people claim that these wild men, some say that they're wild women and children too, are not Bigfoot at all, but rather inbred and untamed humans that have lived their entire lives deep in the woods. They dress in animal skins, hunt and forage for their food, build their own shelters, and so on. Naturally, they don't take kindly to strangers and have been known to kill any interlopers who dare to enter their secret domain, whether by accident or design. And they've been known to eat them as well. Yes, that's correct. The rumors and legends and tales from the dark hills and hollers of the Great Smoky Mountains, as well as other parts of Appalachia, these people are not only isolated, inbred, and demented, they lean towards cannibalism as well. Although the average person might tell you that this is preposterous and there's no way humans, even wild, hairy, inbred ones that have the occasional craving for human flesh, could hide out in the mountains undetected, I counter with this. Have you ever been to the Smokies? Now, I'm not talking about Gatlinburg or any of the touristy areas. I'm not even talking about the myriad of trails that run through the park, which are hiked by millions of hikers every year. I'm talking about deep in the woods, really deep. There are places off trail that it's possible no human has ever set foot, not even the settlers or Cherokee or possibly even Bigfoot, if he exists. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park covers over 500,000 acres. Let that number settle in. 500,000. 522,427 acres, to be exact, as per the National Park Service website. Unless you've been in those deep, deep woods, where there are no trails, no markers, no anything other than you and the forest, it's almost impossible to comprehend just how vast this wilderness is indeed. Now, the ruggedness of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which sits on the border of eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, in fact, it's almost evenly divided between the two states. It has to be not only seen, but experienced to be believed. It's in these giant old-growth forests, so far away from civilization, that you begin to realize just how small and infinitesimal a person is compared to the wilderness. There's no wonder people die out there, especially those that are ill-equipped and ill-prepared. Now, I said all that to say this. There are plenty of places, truly an almost innumerable amount of places, that a person or even a group of persons could hide out for an indefinite amount of time. If you had the basic rough necessities, food, water, shelter, which are all in abundance here if you know what you're doing, there would be no reason to ever leave these woods. Case in point, Eric Robert Rudolph, also known as the Olympic Park Bomber, successfully hid out in the Nantahala National Forest, which is a 533,000-acre expansive wilderness in western North Carolina and along the Appalachian Trail heading toward the Smokies. Rudolph managed to elude the FBI for 5 years. 5 years. And was only caught in 2003 because he left the forest and was rummaging through a trash dumpster in Murphy, North Carolina, outside a grocery store, where he was spotted by a rookie police officer who recognized him from the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Now, if this man with only what appears to be minimal survival skills managed 5 years, imagine the skill set of someone who has never left these woods in their entire lives. As a possibility, it must be considered. Recently, in January and early February of 2021, the internet virtually exploded with a sudden flurry of YouTube videos with theories concerning ongoing tales of feral people in our national parks, forests, and wilderness areas. Also, on the social media platform TikTok, a user named Ariel released a chilling video about a strange incident she had personally experienced at or near the Big Bend National Park in West Texas. In the chilling video, which quickly went viral, Ariel claimed that while camping with her family, they proceeded to spend one night in the Basin Lodge. It was during this night when her story takes a strange twist. Late into the night, Ariel says she began to hear screams from off in the distance. Now, amidst these bone-chilling screams, she also states she heard a woman screaming, "We're going to die.
We're gonna die.
And also the words, "I love you. Just know that."
I love you. Just know that.
Ariel also says she heard what sounded like a child screaming, "Mommy," as well as adults yelling for help, and someone pleading, "Call a ranger."
Call a ranger.
Now, Ariel notified the park rangers and the police, but to no avail. Supposedly, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning, Ariel states that she made further inquiries about the astonishing incident. However, park rangers as well as park employees claimed to have absolutely no knowledge of what she was talking about. Ariel's video opened the floodgates, and other users of social media began sharing their own personal experiences regarding strange happenings in national parks. While there are, naturally, no official reports or documentation at all to back up these wild claims, the stories persist. While the previous encounter doesn't necessarily point toward feral people as the culprits, it does fuel rumors that many hideous and unspeakable things that happen in these national parks are covered up, either by the Park Service, the government, or both. Some theories even claim that these wild, feral people were the reason that the national parks were created in the first place. A place where these people could be contained and kept away from regular society to prevent attacks on innocent citizens while letting them live out their wild, feral lives. Still, other theories claim that these feral people are not actually people at all, but rather, as we mentioned earlier, some type of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, or perhaps, if you can imagine it, even a Bigfoot-human hybrid. Now, there are some First Nations stories, which they're reticent to talk about, of course, that some of their women did mate with these hairy beasts from the forest. Now, this harkens back to the stories of places like Ape Canyon in Washington state, where in the 1920s, miners claimed to have been trapped in their cabin and attacked by a group of what they described as hairy ape men. In the 1800s, near the Glastonbury Mountain area of Vermont in what's known as the Bennington Triangle, a stagecoach had stopped due to the road being washed out. While attempting to dig the coach out, the driver noticed large, bare footprints in the mud, much too large to be a human. Suddenly and without warning, a creature leapt from the surrounding woods and flipped the stagecoach on its side. Now that took some power. The frightened passengers claimed that the beast peered into the windows, then screamed and ran off into the woods. The creature was later described as large, black, hairy, standing over 6 feet tall, and walked and ran on 2 legs. So what are these weird inhabitants of our national parks? Are they Bigfoot, feral, cannibal humans, or some strange combination thereof? Whatever you believe or don't believe, that's up to you. But stay alert and stay safe next time you're out there in the woods. Take precautions, take protection, take a friend. But live to tell the tale.
Helicopters flew over the rugged mountains near Lincoln, New Hampshire for 4 days, and search and rescue crews went out looking on foot. But it wasn't until Friday night that a couple of amateur hikers found 70-year-old Chris Staff.
I just got disoriented. I got on the wrong side of, there was washouts and things like that, and I couldn't find the right path. I'd see people across the river and, I'd tell them I'm in distress, and one guy told me to come across, and I thought I had it. I thought I had somebody that's going to help me. And I don't know if they're real or not, because I crossed the river and nobody's there.
Lost in the woods for nearly a month, 25-year-old Lisa Ferris beat all odds, living off berries and mushrooms and drinking from creeks to survive.
Back from the dead.
When I woke up and didn't comprehend what had happened.
Hiker Michael Napinski was lifeless when Navy crews found him in Mount Rainier National Park last weekend, lost overnight in below freezing conditions.
Just got a complete whiteout.
The rescue team flew him to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle when his pulse stopped. Doctors jumping into action, administering CPR after 45 long minutes, finally jump-starting his heart.
I'm extremely grateful to everybody here at the hospital for not giving up on me. I'm alive and breathing. And
well, the big question police are asking tonight is still simply how 49-year-old Constantino Stanifilippidis wound up missing here at Whiteface Mountain and turned up alive nearly 3,000 miles away 6 days later in Sacramento, California.
Amanda Eller, a physical therapist who was lost on a hike in Maui, telling her story tonight for the first time since she was found after going missing for 17 days.
I haven't even had time to think or integrate or figure out really what the heck happened in there. That's a very grounded way to put it, getting disoriented in the forest. But there was something bigger at play, So Mako Forest in particular, there's something very tricky there.
Tonight, rescuers are calling it a miracle. A teenager surviving 8 days alone in the Washington wilderness on creek water and berries.
Sons John Koparski and Jonas Irwin feared the worst after rescue missions by land and sea turned into recovery efforts for their parents, Carol and Ian. Family and officials say it was thanks to the couple's background in the outdoors that helped them survive.
Mom's like an herbalist, like a mushroom hunter. My dad, with his background in mountaineering, they know how to find things and eat. So they were eating some part of a fern.
My mother said, I lost a shoe. So I was walking with one shoe, and then I lost the other shoe, and I kept walking in my socks, and then I got tired of walking in my socks, so then I was walking bare feet for a while, and she's 77 years old.
He was laying his body flat into that awful thorny crap, which poison oak, you name it, so that Carol could go over him.
Police and 19-year-old Madison Popalizio never came home Sunday after hiking on Mount Algonquin. More than 60 people set out to search for them Monday, fighting their way through deep snow and rough terrain. 36 hours after they went missing, the hikers were airlifted from just below the 5,000-foot summit.
Tonight, the miraculous rescue of Cheryl Powell, finally surrounded by family again. The 60-year-old who went missing in Central California's White Mountains, found alive just hours ago, 3 days after she vanished in the wilderness.
A remarkable story of survival. New details tonight about a mother from the San Fernando Valley who was stranded in Utah's Zion National Park. I mean, she was missing for nearly 2 weeks before she was finally rescued.
Now, we're all familiar with cases where people have gone missing in the forest, having left no trace and are never seen again. But what of the people who went missing and have returned? In many instances, these people tend to be unable to remember what happened during their ordeal. Now, this is understandable in the case of small children, but it's a common situation with adults who've gone missing and returned as well. Oftentimes, though, even those who do remember are reticent to talk about what happened when they were missing. Now, this may sound odd, but when you hear the stories of those who are willing to talk about it, it starts to make more sense. Presented here are 13 stories of those who have disappeared, yet lived to return and share their bizarre tales. Let's begin. Robert Singley. Now, if you ask the locals in Bennington, Vermont, they'll tell you there's something very wrong with Glastonbury Mountain. That particular stretch of the Appalachian Trail has caused many investigators into the paranormal to come to some pretty ominous conclusions because of all the people who have gone missing there, never to be seen again. Some call it the Bennington Triangle, a reference to the Bermuda Triangle, where not only people but planes and ships go mysteriously missing, never to be seen again, with no rhyme, reason, or explanation. There are also tales told of a Bennington monster, which attacks humans and abducts them, leaving no trace they were ever there. Others still talk of the Native American stories of rocks that open up and swallow people whole in this place, as this is where the four winds meet. None of this seemed to be of any concern, though, to 27-year-old UBC music teacher Robert Singley when he decided to go for a hike one Sunday afternoon a couple of years ago. Robert hiked the trail often when he lived in Bennington and never had any strange experiences or problems. He hiked Harbor Road in Woodford Hollow and had a pleasant enough time despite the cold temperature. However, while he made his way back to his car, he suddenly became very disoriented. He attempted to make a fire once he realized he was lost, and because darkness was falling, he didn't stand much chance of making it back to his car until daylight came. However, his attempts were futile because of the rain that suddenly started almost immediately upon Robert losing his way. As his girlfriend at home worried, Robert struggled to gain an understanding of what happened, why he had so suddenly become confused and disoriented. Robert stated, "I still think I got sucked through some sort of space-time continuum." He often took these long hikes, but on this day, fog came out of nowhere, and it was instantly dark, seemingly much before the time of nightfall. Robert couldn't explain how he managed to just lose the trail he was so steadily walking on only seconds before. He spent the night underneath a tree and somehow made his way out the following day. He is one of the lucky ones. This exact spot is where Paula Weldon, a Bennington College sophomore, was last seen alive 62 years ago. There's something about random inclement weather in these cases, kind of like Mother Nature is playing a game. Seems that in a lot of missing person cases, immediately once a search starts, foul weather comes in. Now, what is causing all these seemingly healthy and somewhat experienced hikers to suddenly and for no apparent reason become disoriented and start wandering through deep woods instead of sticking to their trails? That's a question we may never have an answer to, but let's move on. Christopher Staff. Christopher Staff, a 70-year-old man from Dorchester, Massachusetts, went hiking alone in New Hampshire's White Mountains. He decided to embark on the very challenging 31-mile Pemigewasset Loop Trail with no problems or concerns. He had even called his wife the following day and told her he would be home by that evening. He seemed in good spirits and as though the hike had been going well. Later that evening, after receiving no further word from Christopher, his wife called the authorities and reported him missing. A large-scale rescue effort was put in effect with 18 teams, including nearly 30 officers and volunteers, all out scouring the trail and surrounding areas looking for any sign of Christopher. Fear for his life and well-being mounted as the days passed by, and no sign was found that Christopher had even been in these woods or along this trail. However, the following Friday, 5 days after Christopher had initially set out for his hike and seemingly disappeared without a trace, he was found just sitting on a log, covered in scratches, blisters, and bug bites, and was only able to walk to the rescue vehicles with assistance. When questioned about what happened, Christopher stated, "I'm still trying to sort it all out." Christopher was an experienced hiker of more than 40 years and thought he had been well prepared for most anything that would come up while he completed the hike of a lifetime after turning 70 years old. Christopher was less than 5 miles from the end of the 31-mile loop when something went very wrong. He says he suddenly became disoriented on the path and couldn't find the right way to go. He had lost his backpack, which contained water, and had to resort to drinking from the river. Now, this may or may not have had to do with him then spending the next 3 to 4 days hallucinating. "I didn't know where I was," he says. "I thought I came home. I thought I came to get my wife's car. All kinds of crazy things." Christopher lost 25 pounds and was found less than 5 miles away from the road where his car was left. He just couldn't move anymore. He even mentioned hallucinating while at the river that he saw and heard searchers coming to get him and looking for him. However, when he would blink, they would be gone. "I just kept reliving it," Christopher says. He knew Friday would be his last day if help hadn't arrived by then. He was seemingly traumatized from the event and hasn't really recovered. Now, how does someone end up hallucinating like this suddenly and out of the clear blue sky? Christopher had just turned 70 years old, but was in great shape and healthy, so what caused him to simply give up and sit on a rock when he was so close to help the whole time? After all the wandering he had done, was 5 miles really that far for him to traverse to get to the main road? Was whatever made him sick and disoriented somehow stopping him from going on? What could have possibly caused such vivid hallucinations? Story after story, it's the same thing. Point of separation or going out alone and becoming disoriented and hallucinating. Here's another one. Michael St. Laurent. 45-year-old construction safety worker and experienced hiker Michael St. Laurent went missing for 9 days in the wilderness of the North Vancouver backwoods. He scribbled pertinent information about himself onto his arm. His birth date, name, and social insurance number were sloppily scrawled there just in case he didn't make it out of the woods alive. This all started on November 13, 2011, near the Grouse Mountain Skyride, where, while hiking a trail, he suddenly and without warning became confused and disoriented, not knowing where he was going, and what was and was not even real. Michael's account is somewhat confusing and even contradictory, as he states he was hallucinating so badly for most of the time, it was hard for him to recall most of what had occurred during his 9 days of hell in the woods. Michael had planned to hike a roughly 8-hour round-trip trail. However, he was somehow held up and forced to spend the night in the deep wilderness. Fortunately for him, he happened to have not only a dry change of clothes, but a tarp with him, and managed to stay at least partially dry and semi-warm in the frigid Vancouver winter cold. Michael even prepared for a 2-day trip, though he expected to only stay one, assuming he would be fine and ahead of the game in case anything unforeseen came up. Unfortunately for him, something did. It lasted much longer than the 2 days, though. Michael's mind was so foggy and muddled, however, that after becoming lost and veering off the main trail, he couldn't even manage to find any kindling there in the woods, despite the ability to make a fire by hand. For the next 7 days, he wandered aimlessly around the woods, dehydrated, hypothermic, and vividly hallucinating nonstop. He said his hallucinations included being at work, driving home, and even sitting down for a meal in his favorite restaurant. After just 3 days, he thought it had been 3 weeks. Although there were numerous hikers who passed through the area within view of him, Michael was seemingly totally unable to communicate with them in any way. Not for lack of trying, though, as he says he called out for help and did everything he could to get their attention, but to no avail. It was almost like he was invisible to anyone and everyone who passed him by. The only thing the searchers believed saved him was his somehow remarkable ability to remember to cover himself at night with a tarp. At times, he had even had to crawl as he developed a condition from wearing soaked footwear called trench foot. When speaking to the media after being rescued, Michael told them he had seen and heard the searchers looking for him, but was unable to communicate with them and gain their attention, and somehow he claimed they hadn't been able to see or hear him at all. The search and rescue teams deny ever being anywhere near the area Michael stated he saw and heard them. What prompted Michael to write down his personal information on his arm, just in case? He said himself it was a regular day and he had the entire hike planned out. Is it just a coincidence that this is yet another semi-experienced hiker who, for one reason or another, was separated from his group and ended up lost in the woods? What is prompting these people to put themselves in harm's way like this? Lisa Theris. 25-year-old Alabama resident and radiology student Lisa Theris had a couple of strikes against her already as far as anyone finding her when she became lost in the woods in Midway, Alabama, for an entire month in July of 2017. She had severe bipolar disorder, and because of the crowd she was recently hanging out with, most who knew her thought she was just trying to get away for a while. After not being able to reach her at all in 5 days, her father eventually called the police and reported her missing. After searching the most obvious places and coming up with no sign of her, the police then caught up with the last 2 people known to have been in her company, who were also wanted in connection with the robbery of a hunting lodge. When the authorities finally did catch up with these 2 men, one of them claimed the other killed Lisa and had disposed of her body. This led investigators to bring dogs into the woods behind a local Walmart where she may or may not have last been seen, and where the 2 men said they had last seen her. The other man said she was not murdered, but had jumped out of the truck and ran into the woods for no apparent reason the last night they had been with her. Because of the conflicting stories given by the 2 men and their shady and criminal reputations, police decided to go ahead with the cadaver dog search of the woods. After all, Lisa had been missing an entire month, and the likelihood she could survive out there in the wilderness for that long was slim. Eventually, Lisa was pronounced dead, even as the police still searched for her body. 2 days after this pronouncement, however, Lisa stumbled into the road in front of a random vehicle that just happened to be driving by at that time. Lisa had collapsed onto the roadway and an ambulance was called. She was completely naked, covered in sunburns and bug bites, and it was said she wouldn't have lasted another day had she not made her way somehow to the main road to be found and given medical attention. She had lost 50 pounds, and it was considered miraculous that she had even survived at all. Her condition was barely stable. When she was finally able to recount her harrowing ordeal, she gave an extremely strange and seemingly nonsensical story about what she had been through. She claims to have survived from eating wild mushrooms and berries and drinking muddy and mucky stream water. When asked how she had come to be in the woods in the first place, Lisa states she believes she was drugged and left there for dead. There is some question, however, as to how Lisa could have survived based on her claims. Number 1, she was legally blind and didn't have her glasses. Number 2, the berries she claimed to have eaten didn't grow in that area. And thirdly, mushrooms are made mostly of water and have no calories at all. Also, she would have gotten terribly ill, if not dying altogether, from drinking the water she claims to have hydrated herself with. What really happened to Lisa? How could she have eaten berries which didn't grow in the particular area? Was she making it all up, or had she possibly slipped into another dimension or something? Those are questions to which we may never have the answers. Michael Napinski. 45-year-old Michael Napinski of Woodinville, Washington, went on a hike in Mount Rainier with a friend on November 7, 2020. The 2 decided to separate below the Muir snowfield, with Michael snowshoeing to Paradise and his friend continuing on skis to Camp Muir. They were going to meet up at a designated time down near Paradise, close to where Michael was heading to. Suddenly and seemingly out of nowhere, Michael reports the weather turned to extreme whiteout conditions, which prohibited him from being able to see even an inch in front of his face. Obviously, this made it impossible for him to go any further. He recalls taking very small and easy steps to get himself slowly down the mountain, while still seeing nothing but the whiteout conditions ahead of him. This is the last thing he remembers before becoming confused about the next course of events. He says he thinks he fell, but can't be sure as he totally blacked out and has no memory of what actually occurred while he was blindly snowshoeing through the blizzard conditions. Needless to say, Michael didn't make it back to meet his friend near Paradise that evening and was reported as missing. 3 National Park search teams went out and conducted full searches of the area throughout the night, and because the temperatures being 16 degrees Fahrenheit and the whiteout causing minimal to no visibility, the searches were called off for the night. Early Sunday morning, however, the search teams went back out to look for Michael, though everyone's thoughts were grim and thinking the worst at this point. Because of the cloudy weather, too, the aerial searches weren't able to be started until late Sunday afternoon, nearly 24 hours after Michael had been reported as missing by his concerned friend. Helicopter searchers finally found Michael Knapinski in the Nisqually River drainage, and by the time foot searchers got to him about an hour after he was first sighted, he was unconscious. He had a pulse, though weak as it was, when he reached the hospital, but went into cardiac arrest very shortly after arriving. The doctors began using the most advanced form of artificial life support available, which included bypassing his heart and lungs. Miraculously, or some say coincidentally due to the location where he went missing and all the strangeness surrounding Mount Rainier itself, Michael was legally deceased for 45 minutes, yet was able to be brought back to life with no long-term negative effects. Although he remained unconscious for 2 days after his heart started beating again, Michael did wake up and come back to life suffering some frostbite and bruises and scratches, all of which will heal. Is it just a coincidence that this man, who had all of the same bizarre and seemingly random symptoms as so many of the other cases we've talked about here, was miraculously able to return from the dead after 45 minutes? That's not even supposed to be possible. What is really going on here? Danny Philippides. On February 7, 2018, Danny Philippides ventured from his home in Toronto, Canada, to the White-Faced Mountains of New York for a seemingly typical ski trip with some co-workers. The 49-year-old firefighter went missing on the mountain when he separated from the group to go to his car and retrieve his cell phone, which he had initially forgotten to bring with him. He went off by himself, figuring he would be right back and go back to having fun with his friends and colleagues. However, that isn't what happened at all, and despite little bits and pieces that have come out since, we will perhaps never really know what happened to Danny Philippides. Despite having no memory of what happened after he started back down the mountain to go to his car for the phone, he believes he took a wrong turn on a children's ski slope. The doctors would later confirm that he did seem to be suffering from a head injury, but even that doesn't explain where Danny ended up after leaving his friends to run the quick and seemingly harmless errand. Once Danny was reported missing, a manhunt of epic proportions set out to try and find him. At least 6 government agencies joined the 2 local ski patrols and several volunteers in the search. Eventually, more than 135 volunteers searched the area he was last seen and the route he should have taken to his car, which was still parked in the exact same spot he had left it, with the cell phone inside, for a total of 7,000 hours, but to no avail. How could they possibly have known that Danny was at that time in a big rig truck hitchhiking across the country to California? Danny also remembers being dropped off in Sacramento, still wearing his ski clothes and with a brand new cell phone and, inexplicably, a haircut. He was eventually found wandering around the Sacramento Airport rental car facility's parking lot. He had absolutely no idea or clue as to how he ended up there or why. The authorities found him got the surprise of a lifetime when they learned he was the subject of a massive manhunt all the way on the other side of the country. Obviously, so did Danny upon learning the same information. What happened in those 6 days? Where did Danny get the haircut and the new iPhone? And what could have possibly led him all the way across a foreign country like that? More than 2 years later, and these questions still haven't been answered. They may never be either, as Danny has since chosen to remain quiet about the ordeal and has gone back to work in Toronto as a firefighter. Unfortunately, so many of these people who go missing and are found under extraordinary circumstances choose to remain silent about what they encountered, even the ones who remember very clearly. Is this another symptom caused by who or what is doing this to these people? The inability to express what happened? Or is it that there are just no words in our vocabulary to explain what they might have seen or experienced? Amanda Eller. Amanda Eller is a 35-year-old physical therapist and yoga instructor who wanted to go and explore the Makawao Forest Reserve on the northern side of Maui, Hawaii, on May 9, 2019. What was supposed to be a 3-mile relaxing hike to help her get closer to nature ended up turning into a 3-week ordeal that had her fighting for her life. Ellen was reported missing when she never showed back up when she said she would, and when her car was spotted parked near a vast forest reserve in Hawaii, it prompted thousands of volunteers to come out and start immediately searching the vast jungles and streams in the surrounding areas. On a Friday afternoon, 17 days after she first headed out on her hike, and less than an hour after her family had announced a $50,000 reward for information leading to her whereabouts, Ms. Eller was found with sunburn, scrapes, a torn ligament in her knee, and a broken leg. She was malnourished, but she was alive. So what happened to Amanda Eller? How had she become so lost so quickly on what was seemingly a simple and easy, relaxing trail walk through which she had gone many times before without any problems? Now, it's true the area of the reserve is 2,000 acres and has such thick vegetation and brush it needs to be hacked with machetes, but Amanda was on a trail. Here's what she had to say. Amanda claimed she was just going on the short trail walk, which she had done many times before and was really enjoying it. It was just a typical thing on a typical day. As she went off the path at one point to sit and rest, she became disoriented and confused. She stated a very strange gut instinct was pulling her into the opposite direction than the one she was familiar with and knew was right. She decided to go the way towards where she thought her car was, figuring if she just walked towards there, at least she would have a handle on where she was headed. She ended up hiking from around 10:30 a.m. that morning until midnight that night in a desperate search for her car. She admits being ready to just give up and stop trying, but claims as soon as she did, she would hear a certain very loud and strong insistent voice telling her that if she wanted to live, she needed to keep going. She stated, "As soon as I would doubt my intuition and try to go another way than where it was telling me, something would stop me. A branch would fall on me, I'd stub my toe, or I'd trip." So it seems the same gut instinct that seemed to have initially led her astray was in fact now leading her back to where she needed to be, back on the right path. Many people have started to believe that Amanda had actually been abducted. Her cell phone, water bottles, and wallet were all left behind in her car. On the third day, she'd given up looking for her car and decided to start looking for water instead. However, she fell off a 20-foot cliff and tore the ligament in her knee, while the very next day, she lost her shoes in a flash flood. She was only wearing a tank top and yoga pants to begin with, and the injury and loss of her shoes slowed her down considerably. At night, she covered herself with ferns and branches and leaves. She even spent one night in a wild boar's den. She survived by eating almost anything she could find, things that were identifiable and some that weren't. She even ate moths that landed on her body. She began to crawl instead of walking and was then confronted with a seemingly impassable steep drop-off. Meanwhile, the volunteer searchers were going through their own harrowing ordeals as the search for Amanda led many of them into fast-moving streams and had them rappelling into ravines. Some even killed aggressive wild boars and searched the dead animals' intestines for Amanda's body parts. At least one searcher was attacked by a wild boar but managed to get away and survive. Amanda stated later that she had seen and heard multiple helicopters, but despite trying her best to get their attention, they never spotted her. Until eventually, one did and sent rescue. How did this woman survive so many days in the wilderness, with no shoes and with the injuries and Mother Nature seemingly against her at every single turn? Could it have been the voice she heard, loud and clear, telling her she must choose between life and death? If so, who or what was it? Luckily, Amanda chose life. Gia Fuda. 18-year-old Giovanna Fuda, or Gia as she likes to be called, decided to go for a drive on July 24, 2020, and was headed to a town about 70 miles east of Seattle. The teenager just wanted to go and take a short road trip alone to clear her head and relax. For reasons still unknown, however, she ventured much farther than she initially set out to and ended up far past the city views of Seattle and into the wilderness and wilds of a remote area of Washington state. By 1 a.m. the next morning, when her parents had received no response back from their many phone calls and texts to Gia, and when she herself hadn't returned home or even checked in, they decided to call the authorities and report their daughter as missing. At around 10 a.m. the morning she had left her home and started her trip, she was seen on video camera in a coffee shop near the town of Index. She bought a Bigfoot keychain and left. 3 days after her disappearance, on July 27th, a transportation worker found her car nearby that shop and reported it to the police. He said he only noticed the car because of the awkward way in which it was parked. After running the license plate, the authorities found that the car was Gia's and it had run out of gas. All the doors were locked and her purse and other personal items were left inside. At this point, the police started to think foul play was involved and maybe she had been forcibly abducted. Search and rescue teams were already out and looking for her as of July 26, but the area made it impossible to track her by pings because it was a cell phone dead zone. On August 1st, some of the searchers found Gia's belongings, such as her shoes, Bible, bag, and cell phone. These possessions were found near Scenic Creek, and just a little while later that same day, Gia was found up a steep ravine sitting on a rock next to the river. Gia stated she had panicked when her car had run out of gas and decided it would cut some of the walking distance off where she'd cut through the woods to get to a gas station. She said that she was frightened and didn't know what to do, so she grabbed what she felt was most important that she could carry and locked the rest of her possessions in her car. She was found 10 miles away from the nearest gas station. She felt that walking along the highway was too dangerous, but ended up getting lost and wandering around the forest for 9 days. She thought she was only lost for 3 days, however, as she lost her sense of time. When she was first found, Gia just kept repeating, "I don't know where I am," over and over again, as if in some sort of trance. She was eventually taken to the hospital, though, and managed to get through the ordeal with no long-term effects. It didn't go unnoticed, though, to many people who investigated or looked further into the case, that Gia had purchased a Bigfoot keychain right before going through this harrowing and terrifying ordeal. Coincidence or not? Carol Kaparsky and Ian Irwin. Married couple Carol Kaparsky and Ian Irwin, aged 77 and 72 respectively, were staying in a cottage while on vacation in the Sea Haven, Inverness, California area in February of 2020 when, on their checkout date, which was the 15th, came and went without the couple ever returning home or being seen leaving. They went missing on the 14th and left belongings, including their wallets and cell phones, in their room, and their car was also still parked where it had been the last time they were seen. Little did they know their careers would come in handy while trying to survive 8 days lost in the wilderness. Carol was an herbalist and mushroom hunter, while Ian had a background in mountaineering. When the couple were reported missing, searchers scoured the area by air, boat, and land for days, but to no avail. Finally, on February 20th, officials said their search efforts were now transitioning to a recovery effort. Now, usually this means they assume the couple were deceased and the searchers were looking to recover their bodies. Then, 8 days after they were last seen, the 22nd, the couple were miraculously found alive and mostly well in the dense terrain with only light hypothermia to recover from. Carol and Ian told authorities that they decided to go for a simple and romantic hike for Valentine's Day, but got lost in the dark. They couldn't find their way back and survived by drinking muddy puddle water. The couple is choosing to remain silent about their ordeal and said they may eventually be able to tell of how they survived a terrifying 7 nights in the Inverness wilderness. All we do know is that one point is a bit strange. Carol willingly took her shoes off, which caused Ian to have to lay down in thick thorns so she could use his body as a kind of bridge to walk across. One can only imagine what they each could have been thinking during all this, but it just doesn't seem to make much sense. Why not just keep her shoes on and walk across? Also, how does someone get so lost, even in the dark, on such a simple hiking trail that they end up in such an extremely dangerous and dense brush area? Until the couple decide to recount their harrowing ordeal, we probably won't know the answers to this one either. Maddie Popolizio and Blake Alois. Maddie Popolizio and her boyfriend Blake Alois had just reached the top of the second highest mountain in New York State, the Algonquin, when what they planned to be just a quick day hike very quickly went all wrong. According to 19-year-old Maddie, everything was fine around noon that day. The weather was beautiful, and the couple didn't foresee any trouble at all and thought it was going to be a regular hike through the beautiful scenery of the area. They couldn't have been more wrong. All of a sudden, and seemingly out of nowhere, a fog so intense, dense, and thick came over the entire mountain, leaving the two completely blind. They couldn't see an inch in front of them. Does that sound familiar? Only in this case it's fog and not the sudden whiteout of snow from a previous disappearance. Maddie stated, "As soon as we got to the top, a massive fog came over the entire summit. It was so intense I could not see my hand in front of my face. If I wasn't latched on to Blake, I would have completely lost him." Then, when a sudden snowstorm hit at the summit, the couple decided immediately that their best course of action would be to climb back down the mountain. However, whiteout conditions from the fog and snow prevented them from seeing the trail that they had followed up. They linked arms and decided then to walk towards a clearing they thought might lead to a trail back down. Unfortunately, as soon as their feet lifted off the rock they were standing on at the summit, they plummeted down 100 feet. This unfortunate turn of events landed them on the opposite side of the summit from which they had originally climbed up. Luckily, the couple landed on bent, snow-covered trees and, with their snowshoes, tried to climb back up the side of the mountain to get back up to the summit and reassess the situation. This didn't seem to be working, however. Despite wearing the snowshoes, the couple recalled, "Even with the snowshoes, we were just falling through massive amounts of snow." Terrified and with nowhere to go, the couple returned to the more secure spot they had fallen to on top of the trees. Then they built a wall of snow to try and block the wind and light Ian's backpack on fire with a fire starting kit they had with them. The intense winds and heavy snow prevented any fire or heat from being made or generated, though, and the couple feared they weren't going to make it out of this situation alive. Their phones had no power or service, and they spent the first day screaming at the top of their lungs for help, assuming they would be rescued by nightfall. However, that wasn't the case. They spent 2 more days this way, huddled together, keeping each other as warm as they could with body heat and each trying to keep the other sane. When they were finally rescued, they were located about 265 feet southeast of the mountain summit. Ground crews eventually came upon them, still on top of the bent and snow-covered trees. The couple told of how, on the first night, Maddie couldn't feel her toes because of the freezing cold snow, and in an attempt to keep her warm, Blake emptied out his backpack and zipped it up around her feet and legs. Within minutes, she regained feeling in her toes, but useful supplies such as their knife, rechargeable crank light, and 90% of their food were lost forever in the deep snow. There were multiple times where Maddie had fallen into snow which covered over the top of her head, and Blake lost his gloves pulling her out to save her life. Luckily, the couple didn't sustain any long-term injuries or effects from their strange and terrifying ordeal. Why is it that blinding weather always comes along in the blink of an eye and makes hikers unable to see and therefore puts them at risk for major injury and incapacitation? It's the same thing over and over again and completely defies any logic or explanation. Some may say Mother Nature is just a fickle woman and changes her mind on a whim, but there are others, those of us that don't believe in so much coincidence, who wonder, is there something else at play here? Cheryl Powell, 60-year-old Cheryl Powell from Huntington Beach, California, went missing for 4 days in the remote wilderness of the White Mountains near the Nevada border. She claims a knife-wielding maniac chased her into the backcountry. Cheryl reported that, as her husband set up their campsite, she decided to take their dog for a short walk. This is when she says the man accosted her. All of a sudden, some guy pops out from behind a tree or something, she said, as she described the incidents which led to her disappearance. It was scary. I was really nervous about the fact he was threatening to do my dog harm. Though she admittedly bolted right away, Cheryl says she didn't feel safe that she was alone in the woods until at least a full 24 hours later. Her disappearance kicked off an intense 4-day search by the Inyo County Sheriff's Department. They interviewed other campers in the area, Cheryl's husband, of course, and they even used a loudspeaker to call out to the couple's dog, Miley. Search and rescue also combed the area, searching on foot with dogs and conducting aerial searches as well, but all to no avail. The strange part is, though, that aside from not finding any evidence of Cheryl or her dog being anywhere in the area, there were also no reports of a suspicious person or vehicle either. Where had this man, described by Cheryl as big, burly, bald, and tan, come from? Where had he gone? Cheryl's family very quickly started urging the authorities to start working under the assumption that she had been abducted. Eventually, it was Miley the dog's barking that alerted the authorities to Cheryl's whereabouts. Aside from being very scared and extremely exhausted, Cheryl was found alive and safe. As for the knife-wielding attacker who initially chased Cheryl into the woods, there have been no reports at all besides her initial description of any suspicious persons, vehicles, or activities that day. Who or what was it that chased Cheryl? Could this be yet another reason for some of the many disappearances across the country and even the world? Why had there been no other reports at all about a suspicious-looking man? Was Cheryl somehow the only one who could see him? Even if so, what did he want, and why hadn't he given chase when Cheryl initially took off? Very odd indeed that he just let her run off and didn't give chase. Could he have been trying to lure her into the woods for another reason? Perhaps for someone or something other than himself? For now, we just don't have any answers. Alma Tolman. Alma Tolman was an Eagle Scout and experienced camper when he seemed to have vanished into thin air while on a camping outing on Antelope Island. Antelope Island, with an area of 42 square miles, is the largest of 10 islands located within the Great Salt Lake, Utah. Alma was dropped off on the island on Tuesday, April 29, 1998, and was scheduled to be picked up by his brother that Friday, May 1st. When his brother returned to pick him up, he waited several hours. As Alma's canteen and backpack were missing, his brother assumed he had gone on a hike. Eventually, though, when his brother hadn't returned, Alma's brother became very concerned he'd gotten lost or possibly injured while out hiking. Searches of the island and surrounding waters were done by boat, helicopter, and ground crews of up to 50 people. Dogs were also deployed to search, but no trace of Alma was found. There were reports of him cashing a check at a local Walmart after he'd been reported missing, and also surveillance footage of someone matching his description at a 7-Eleven in Syracuse. However, neither of these sightings could be definitively confirmed as Alma, and so the investigation went on. The strangeness of this case, however, has a total human element to it, with it later coming out that Alma actually did disappear on purpose to get out of moving to Italy that June and getting married. Seems Alma had a case of the wedding jitters and cold feet, which is kind of an extreme measure to disappear yourself for those reasons. Needless to say, Alma was found alive and well a few days later, and eventually admitting it had all been an elaborate ruse to get out of the move and the marriage. Holly Courtier. 38-year-old California mom Holly Courtier went missing in one of America's most beloved and most treacherous frontiers for 2 whole weeks without being found. Despite the media frenzy her disappearance eventually caused, nobody is really sure how Holly ended up where she did. It's speculated she was having some sort of mental breakdown as she left her house in the middle of the night without telling anyone where she was going. She later stated she was seeking a total disconnect from the world and wanted to be completely alone by herself for a while. However, Holly seemed to have gotten more than she bargained for, as, while she certainly got some time alone, the injuries she ended up suffering were strange enough, but her story doesn't make much sense either. Here's what we know about what happened to Holly Courtier at Zion State Park, and what she said when she was found on October 18, 2020. She was visibly exhausted, famished, dehydrated, had lost 15 pounds, and was found to have a concussion. What was supposed to be a brief spiritual pilgrimage turned into a fight for her life. Her disappearance is different because the widespread panic on the internet and the massive amounts of pleas for help in finding Holly and pleas from her family turned into conspiracies and hate messages, so many that the family had to cancel all social media accounts and even change their phone numbers. So, what caused all this vitriol towards a woman who simply wanted to disconnect for a little while and raise her spiritual vibration? What caused Holly to, seemingly out of nowhere, get up and sneak off like a thief in the night to simply go for a hike? According to her family, Holly is an experienced hiker who knows Zion National Park very well and is capable of surviving the extreme and rugged conditions. Holly hit her head on the sharp edge of a tree she had her hammock tied to, and this happened very shortly after arriving and starting up the first trail. This knock on the head caused extreme disorientation. After this blow to the head, she didn't have the energy to move around anymore. Despite being close to a river, Holly refused to drink the water because of concerns about toxicity. When found 2 weeks later, Holly was so dehydrated she couldn't open her mouth. Luckily, Holly was found alive and didn't have any long-term injuries, though her kidneys were barely functioning and she had an extreme lack of potassium. She did make a full recovery. One unanswered question looms, though, in both skeptics and believers of Holly's story alike. Why, when she could hear the searchers close and calling her name, when she called back to them, they never heard or saw her there? They were within feet of Holly. She was too weak to approach them, and they never noticed her yells, nor her person, sitting, literally praying she would make it out of this ordeal alive. Hello, friends. In this video, we're going to discuss the strange disappearances of some of the people you'd most likely unexpect to go missing. Park rangers. Now, we're using parks as a broad term in the scope of this video, as it could include lands protected culturally or historically, including national parks, state parks, and other designated wildlife, wilderness, and recreational areas. Different countries use different names for this position. Warden is the favorite term in Canada, Ireland, and the United Kingdom. Within the United States, the National Park Service refers to the position as a park ranger. The U.S. Forest Service refers to the position as a forest ranger. Other countries use the term park warden or even game warden to describe this occupation. Now, the profession includes a number of disciplines and specializations, and park rangers are often required to be proficient in more than one of the following: law enforcement, emergency response, firefighting, dispatch, scientist and scholar, maintenance, and administration. These individuals, particularly those in administration, are often heavily cross-trained in several of the aforementioned areas in order to allow for a knowledge of all other areas and duties under their authority. As a result, when people become lost or go missing in a park, the park rangers are usually the first ones on the scene to document the case and to start search and rescue efforts into motion. More than anyone, park rangers are very familiar with the missing person phenomenon, which happens in parks around the world, and were actually among the first to write about it. But what happens when one of these rangers themselves go missing? I invite you to join me now as we explore 5 strange cases of missing park rangers. With that said, let's begin. Number 1, Ranger Ralph W. Heath. Ralph W. Heath was a park ranger at Baxter State Park in Maine, United States, who allegedly died of exposure while attempting to rescue a woman who was lost on Mount Katahdin in 1963. On Monday, October 28th of that year, 2 women, Helen Mower and Margaret Ibisek, both from Concord, Massachusetts, took the Cathedral Trail and climbed Baxter Peak on the mountain. They reached the summit and stopped to have lunch at around 1:30 in the afternoon. When the 2 friends decided to start their hike again and head back down, they had a small argument over the route Margaret wanted to take. Helen simply wanted to go back the way they came, but Margaret wanted to bushwhack, which, very simply put, means to leave the established trail or get off the beaten path, as it were. Helen knew how risky this was, although Margaret had more hiking experience than she did, not by much, and only 3 years total. She thought it way too dangerous and stormed off to take Dudley Trail, which was the original trail they had taken to get there in the first place, and let her friend make her own mistakes and go her own way. It was a decision she would later regret very much. Margaret, on the other hand, thought she was taking a shortcut and laughed off her friend's warnings, and they went their separate ways, agreeing to meet at the Chimney Pond lean-to. When Helen reached the final destination and saw there was no sign of Margaret, she decided to wait, but got very worried very quickly. Though it was a nice and sunny day out that day, a nor'easter was blowing in, and the weather was about to very quickly take a turn for the worse. She started calling for Margaret at the headwell, near and towards the mountain itself. She was pleasantly surprised when she heard her friend respond and started calling back, despite the fact she was asking for help. Margaret yelled that she was not hurt, but was stuck in the treacherous terrain and wouldn't possibly be able to continue her turn back, and pleaded with Helen to go and get some help. This is when Helen made her way to the ranger station and encountered Ranger Ralph Heath having dinner. She explained the situation, and Ralph immediately knew how dangerous that path was and how serious a problem they had. He was, however, thanking his lucky stars, in his mind at least, that there hadn't been any snowfall, at least not yet. As any other year, for as far back as he could remember, there would have been snow covering the mountain for weeks at that point in the year. Ralph followed Helen back to Chimney Point and yelled out in the direction of Margaret and instructed her in a very calm and clear voice to stay where she was and not try to move or go anywhere. Help was on the way. With the wind increasing like it was, Ralph knew that the situation could go from scary to deadly in a matter of just seconds. He had to act fast. He took Helen back to the ranger station and radioed his supervisor, Helan Taylor, and told him there was a hiker stranded in the upper basin on the mountain. Now, a little background on Mr. Ralph Heath to show what a brave man he was indeed, and how he was definitely not someone to shy away from trouble. He served in World War II and was honorably discharged. However, a house fire destroyed everything he owned but the clothes on his back, including his discharge papers. He was redrafted to serve in the Korean War before anyone could verify he had already been discharged and had finished his service to the country. Ralph, however, went without hesitation to serve, only for his wife to decide she didn't want to deal with another tour, especially one he shouldn't have had to have gone on, and file for divorce. So, this was a man who was seeking solitude and peace in his life after all of this tragedy and heartbreak, and he absolutely loved his job as a ranger and the beauty of the mountains. Despite the weather outside becoming more and more perilous and the orders from the supervising ranger that they had to wait until morning to attempt any kind of search and rescue, Ralph decided the risk to Margaret was too great, leaving her out there all alone at night. Snow was definitely coming, and a lot of it. He decided to attempt the rescue himself, despite it being nightfall and dark outside. The temperature had drastically dropped as well. He borrowed Helen's backpack and filled it with essentials such as food, a sleeping bag, water, a parka, and extra clothes. He also took 80 feet of rope and at 11 p.m. that same night headed alone down Dudley Trail. It wasn't until 5 hours later, at 4 in the morning, that he reported back to Helen. He told her he had spoken to Margaret about an hour after heading out and was able to obtain her location when he again told her to stay put and assured her help was on the way. She reiterated she was uninjured but very cold. She's probably more than a little scared as well, I'm sure. He told Helen that Margaret was near the waterfall and he wouldn't be able to reach her without more rope and more people. This was an area that even ice climbers considered treacherous and dangerous. Ralph was also extremely concerned because Margaret was refusing to stay and wait for help to arrive and was determined to find a way out herself for fear she would freeze to death before anyone would be able to rescue her. After reassuring Helen and telling her what was going on, he contacted his supervisor, Helan Taylor, and made him aware as well. Taylor dispatched the Maine Forest Service, 2 additional park rangers, and a Maine game warden. By 6 in the morning, Tuesday the 29th, an icy rain began to fall and the wind had picked up drastically. Ralph Heath ate his breakfast and then informed Helen Maurer of his plans. He was going to ascend the ravine from Chimney Pond, climb straight up the head wall and into the waterfall, where he would provide comfort to Barbara, and if he couldn't manage to rescue her himself, at least she wouldn't be scared and alone, and he would wait with her until the additional resources arrived to get them both out. Now, he was clearly putting himself at great risk, knowing it was unlikely he would be able to do anything but just sit with Margaret and wait. Yet, he did it anyway. He was truly a hero. While the plan was very reasonable, and despite being a chain smoker, Ralph was in great shape and a capable hiker and climber. However, he had hiked Dudley Trail 4 times in the last 24 hours, and it was a very strenuous and hard trail to get through. He was absolutely exhausted at this point, and shouldn't have been doing any more hiking or climbing without getting some much-needed rest. This would, after all, be a trailless climb he was planning to make. He wasn't going to leave Margaret, however, so the admonishments and warnings from his co-workers and even Helen fell on deaf ears. Ralph reached Barbara just as Hurricane Jenny reached the mountain. He sat with her for a little while and the two hunkered down. A ranger sergeant set out on foot towards Chimney Pond as well and stated that, by the time he got to just the basin, the conditions were whiteout with gale-force winds. By noon, not even the jeeps could make it to the trailhead. There was 18 inches of snow already and more falling fast. He even reported that, only halfway up the mountain, his clothes had frozen solid and literally cracked at the elbows. Having no visibility and facing merciless winds, not to mention the condition of his clothing, forced him back down the mountain. He stated he knew that both Ralph and Margaret were in some very serious trouble as help could no longer get to them. It would be impossible for them to help themselves as well. The following morning, Wednesday, October 30th, 1963, Warden Supervisor David Priest returned to Roaring Brook and set up what we today call an Incident Command Center and had at least 35 people there working at all times. All different avenues of help were brought in and explored, but nobody could do anything as the snow was still accumulating and fast on Friday morning. Flash forward to November 1st. Now it had been 5 full days since Margaret had gotten herself stuck and 4 whole days since Ralph Heath had joined her to provide comfort and possible rescue, which we know now he was unable to do. On Saturday, November 2nd, all teams and persons involved decided that any rescue attempts were futile and that they were simply wasting resources at that point. Mr. William Lowell Putnam III was one of the most experienced mountaineers in the country at the time and had been helping with the rescue effort since Friday. Finally, on Sunday, November 3rd, he made the statement that he believed Ralph and Margaret had most likely died on Tuesday and reiterated the waste of resources should they continue on this impossible trek to try and save them. It wasn't until almost 6 months later, in April of 1964, that Margaret Ivesick's body was found and finally able to be brought down the mountain and sent home. Even at this time, though, they needed chemical salts to melt the ice so as not to damage the corpse in any way, and the rescue still took an additional 3 days. It was found during the autopsy that Margaret was severely injured and hadn't survived more than a few hours due to the extreme blood loss. Her official cause of death was exsanguination. In other words, she bled out. 2 weeks later, on May 15th, they finally found Ralph's body. He was found, oddly enough, 400 feet above where Margaret was found. They airlifted him out of there, and his autopsy showed nothing at all. The coroner stated, "It looks as if he simply sat down and went to sleep," which is not uncommon when people freeze to death. Now, folks, though this was a bit of a long one, I think it's important we go over a few of the facts here. First, if Margaret had died very quickly after getting stuck where she was, how was she yelling to Ralph hours later? She had severed an artery in her leg and would have bled out within just minutes. Still, she was calling out and answering him hours after she initially got stuck. How is this even possible? She'd called out to Helen as well, even before that, and we know neither one was under any kind of duress or sick at all, so they couldn't have been hallucinating. There were no other bodies found in the area that time, and no one else had come forward claiming to have been the person stuck up there and answering or calling for help that could have been mistaken for Margaret. This is very strange, but becoming more and more common. Either search and rescue workers will hear the calls of people who are missing only to never be able to find the location where the calls are coming from, or the person who is stuck or lost will hear search and rescue but never seem to be able to find them either. The weather coming on so suddenly and so strong all at once is another very familiar factor when talking about the missing in the woods and the mountains. In fact, they were weeks late for any snow at all, and the weather started out that day as sunny and warm. This is just one of the many parameters we now look at while investigating the strange deaths and disappearances in the national parks. How and why did it all come on so suddenly, almost remarkably so? I guess we'll never know. But that doesn't stop us from investigating and pondering and searching for answers and the truth, though, does it? Number 2, Ranger Randy Morganson. In July of 1996, Ranger Randy Morganson was working as a backcountry ranger at Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. He was the most ranger in the High Sierras, having been a backwoods ranger for 28 years at that time. On this particular day, July 21st, 1996, Randy loaded his pack and went on his routine and regular patrol of his station. He was 64 years old and in almost perfect health. Some of his co-workers even thought he was invincible and impervious to the perils that came with the job. It was just about daybreak when he headed out to patrol near Bench Lake, taking nothing with him but an old ski pole to use as a hiking stick. He was never seen or heard from again. Now, as is often the case in these strange disappearances, a sudden rain started to fall, blew up out of nowhere, got rid of any footprints or other evidence as to where Ranger Randy could have possibly gone or what could have happened to him. Over the following days, there was plenty of frustration as dogs followed scents that seemed to abruptly stop, and random pieces of gear were found in several different locations, but none could be positively linked to Randy. A FLIR helicopter equipped with an infrared camera picked up a campfire burning on a hillside, but with no one in sight tending it. Eventually, the search was called off, with no sign of Randy or a body. Then, a letter arrived at Randy and Judy Morganson's home in Sedona, Arizona, from Randy. Judy opened the letter and noted it had been postmarked 2 days after his apparent disappearance. Since there is no postal service in the national park, Judy didn't understand just how Randy could have mailed the letter. That added to the suspicions that he had simply left the area to start a new life away from the National Park Service. 13 days after Randy had been reported missing, in early August 1996, the official search, which included helicopters, dog teams, and dozens upon dozens of volunteers, was called off. Not a single trace of Randy had been found, not even a footprint. Finally, in July 2001, 5 years after the search was called off for Randy, a 19-year-old member of a California Conservation Corps trail building crew ventured off trail and found some remains. The worker found some new evidence near a creek and a gorge in the Widow Peak drainage, very near the outermost borders of the search area, below the pools of a waterfall. Rangers were called in to search and soon discovered a tattered shirt with Morganson's badge attached. Then a backpack with a buckle fastened, and a boot. On close examination of the single boot, which was half submerged in water, it had something white protruding from it. A leg bone. The boot and pack seemed to match the description of gear that Randy reportedly had been using that day. Teams for both investigation and recovery were flown in, and shortly after, a functioning park-issue radio was discovered resting on top of the falls, not at the bottom like the other evidence. It was turned to the on position. This discovery confused matters even more. Although these remains seemed to confirm Randy had been in the mountains the whole time, investigators weren't certain whether this is where Randy had died. Rangers had remembered already searching this gorge and crossing at the exact spot where the radio was found. Retired Sierra Subdistrict Ranger Alden Nash believes Morganson had fallen through a snow bridge and broken his leg, and his body had simply been hidden beneath ice throughout the search. Weirdly, during the rescue attempt in 1996, Randy's wife Judy had dreamed of a dead man floating in a lake. I don't think it was an accident, says Eric Blem, author of The Last Season, a book about the disappearance of Randy Morganson, which is well worth a read, by the way. Blem says Randy may have wanted to appear to have died on the job just to make sure Judy, who was still his wife at the time, got the benefit from the government, a policy not honored in the case of taking one's own life. If he wanted to throw off the dogs or sucker people into believing something happened, he did a great job, Blem says. After so many years, with the bones gnawed, there's no way to say exactly what happened. The National Park Service named a peak in memory of Randy. The unofficial Mount Morganson, so named in his memory, is the first peak west of Mount Russell, a half a mile away, and just north of Mount Whitney. Mount Morganson should be distinguished from the west peak of Mount Russell, the higher of the Russell's twin summits, which are only separated by a tenth of a mile. A summit registered with the name Mount Randy Morganson, 13,920 feet, was taken to the top by two park veterans in 2007. A peak bagger named Richard Petrowski found the original register missing when he climbed Mount Morganson on June 20, 2008. He placed a temporary one that day and made a huge effort to return to the summit 1 week later with a weatherproof ammo can and a replacement journal. Barely a handful of people, if any, signed it each year. Number 3, Ranger Brendan Unit. Larimer County, Colorado Department of Natural Resources Ranger Brendan Unit, 27 years old, went missing while out searching at night for a missing boater. While there had been nothing reported about the results of the initial missing person who Brendan was looking for, it seems a sudden high wind event caused him to capsize in his boat and die of what was officially said to be freshwater drowning. Now, folks, I'm no expert, but what I do know about is the strange weather events and causes of death that just don't fit the season or the profession the person in question was in. And I'm not the only one either. Many people are wondering how a professional outdoorsman could capsize and drown. And what about this so-called strange high wind event? Why does there always seem to be a sudden change in the weather during one of these missing persons encounters? These are the things many of us in this community wonder about after seeing case after case after case. The same thing over and over again, but never with any definitive or even sensible answers. Number 4, Ranger Jeff Christensen. In July of 2005, another seasonal park ranger died under mysterious circumstances in the same county Brendan Unit passed away in as well. Jeff Christensen was conducting a routine backcountry patrol of the Lake Lawn trailhead when he allegedly lost his footing and fell from Mummy's Range in Rocky Mountain National Park in Larimer County, Colorado. The search for the initially missing ranger lasted a little over a week, and he was found on August 6, 2005 by a hiker. The official cause of death was a left temporal skull fracture that led to a subdural hematoma. The ranger has been said to have lost his footing and died of a tragic accidental fall. He'd only been on the job for 4 years and was survived by his parents. Now, is it possible for someone with at least 4 years' experience to die of something so simple? Could it be that there's something out there in our national parks and forests hunting these rangers? Perhaps they or it wants to take out the people who are going to be able to help and possibly even save the other people this mysterious predator or predators are trying to take out. We must keep searching for the truth. We owe it to all the people who die of something that is seemingly simple and accidental, but could very well be something much more sinister. Number 5, Ranger Paul Fugate. Here is yet another tragic account of a park ranger who vanished mysteriously while doing his job, never to be seen or heard from again. Now, Paul was known as a rebel and even anti-establishment to a point. He stayed for weeks at a time in a small cobblestone cabin on site at the monument. He was a naturalist who did small tasks such as answering the visitors' questions and putting together trail guides. Originally, Paul worked at the Navajo Monument in Arizona, but was transferred soon after being disciplined by one of his bosses about his laziness and slovenly appearance. Apparently, this supervisor admitted in a later report that he was annoyed he couldn't technically fire Paul, and also that he hated the hippies coming in to work for the monument. Paul was charged with stealing government equipment when he took some hay home for his wife's horse. He was in an open relationship with his wife and sleeping with multiple women who were co-workers. While all of this may seem irrelevant, we must look at every aspect we can of a person's life when they go missing under such strange circumstances, especially when people in their profession are seemingly doing so at an alarming rate, and have been for a while. Before he left his post that fateful day, he left instructions with the only other staff member there that if he wasn't back by a certain time, for them to close up without him. He then walked out and down towards the area of land the park was about to acquire, one which was shrouded in problems as there had been much conflict about the 400-acre purchase with the local Apache tribe. Again, he was never seen or heard from, and no body has ever been found. Hello friends, and welcome to another episode. In this video, we invite you to join us for a trip down the strange rabbit hole that some refer to as the Bennington Triangle. The area known as the Bennington Triangle, which surrounds Glastonbury Mountain in the New England state of Vermont, has a long, strange history of bizarre occurrences. This includes UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, eerie lights and sounds, and the triangle also happens to be the location of several unsolved disappearances during the 1940s and 1950s. If that isn't odd enough, according to Native American lore, the area is heavily cursed. The Native American tribes of New England have always known something was off with the area and tend to steer clear of it at all costs. One particularly chilling legend from the Algonquin tribe cautions of the existence of what are described as evil rocks in the mountains, which have the ability to spring open and devour those unfortunate enough to step upon them. Now, this is rather interesting, considering how people have vanished without a trace from within the triangle. New England author Joseph A. Citro is the person considered to have coined the term Bennington Triangle in 1992 while doing a radio broadcast about paranormal and other unusual activity in the area. According to Citro's findings, he states that the area has similar characteristics with the equally strange Bridgewater Triangle in the bordering state of Massachusetts, which has been written about extensively by cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman. The Bennington Triangle is centered around the heavily wooded forest of Glastonbury Mountain and also includes the small towns of Bennington, Woodford, and Shaftesbury, and also the abandoned or ghost towns of Somerset and Glastonbury. Over the last 200 years, there have been many encounters with and sightings of a Bigfoot-like cryptid in the area surrounding Glastonbury Mountain. The locals, as well as paranormal and cryptozoological investigators, refer to this unknown creature as the Bennington Monster. The earliest recorded sightings of the beast occurred in the early 1800s, when a stagecoach loaded with passengers was forced to stop its journey due to a heavily washed-out section of the stage road. The driver of the stagecoach observed that there were very large footprints in the mud, which were way too large to belong to any human. While the perplexed driver was pondering these prints, the stagecoach was suddenly attacked by a large creature that was strong enough to flip the stagecoach over onto its side. The terrified passengers stated that they observed a frightening pair of large eyes peering into the overturned coach at them before whatever the creature was screamed and then ran off to disappear in the surrounding woods. The passengers would later describe the monster as a large, hairy black creature well over 6 feet in height. The area has long been rife with tales of people suddenly going missing within the area of the triangle. One of the oddest disappearances was that of a man named Carol Herrick in 1943. Herrick disappeared while on a hunting trip just a few miles northeast of the abandoned town of Glastonbury. Although his body was found 3 days later, it was observed to be surrounded by dozens of footprints, too large for a normal person. It was also determined that Carol appeared to have been squeezed to death. Then, beginning in 1945 and continuing for the next 5 years, people began to go mysteriously missing from the area with an alarming regularity. A man named Mitty Rivers, a 74-year-old hunting guide very familiar with the area, went missing on November 12, 1945. Rivers, who had led many hunting parties in the area over decades, was taking a group of 4 hunters to the oddly named Hell Hollow area, which is located within the southwest forest of Glastonbury. While leading the hunting party back to camp, he somehow got ahead of the other 4 and, for reasons unknown, never returned to the campsite. At first, the other hunters were not overly concerned, as they knew Mitty to be an expert woodsman and knowledgeable guide. When Rivers still had failed to return the next day, the authorities were contacted and an extensive search was held, comprising as many as 300 worried locals, as well as a number of U.S. Army soldiers who had been dispatched from nearby Fort Devens in Massachusetts. They searched through the deep woods for 8 straight days, but the only possible evidence found was an ammo cartridge for the same type rifle that Rivers was known to be carrying. The cartridge was found in a shallow stream, and there was no evidence of any foul play or animal attack nearby. Although they had no luck with the extensive search effort, many of Mitty's friends and those local to the area were sure with the man's knowledge of the woods and survival skills he would eventually return. However, this never came to be, and no trace of the missing guide has ever been found. The area from which Rivers vanished is near Long Trail Road and Vermont State Route 9. The very next year, on Sunday, December 1st, 1946, an 18-year-old college student named Paula Weldon went missing while hiking in the same area around Long Trail Road. Easily remembered because she was wearing a bright red jacket, several people recalled seeing her that day, including a shop clerk in Bennington who had provided her with directions, and also a couple of elderly hikers who had been approximately 300 feet behind her on the trail for part of their hike. The alarm was sounded when the college sophomore didn't show up the next morning for her classes at Bennington College. An extensive search was launched by local authorities and included more than 1,000 volunteer searchers. There were also searches conducted from the air, and with the assistance of the FBI, and a $5,000 reward was offered. When interviewed, the elderly couple who had observed Paula hiking just ahead of them on the trail stated that after they watched her turn a corner on the trail, she seemed to have just vanished. Despite the extensive searches and the offer of the $5,000 reward, no trace of Paula Weldon has ever been found, and her fate remains unknown. Exactly 3 years to the day of the disappearance of Paula Weldon, a man named James Tedford suddenly vanished from a bus on December 1st, 1949. A military veteran and resident of the local Bennington Soldiers' Home, Tedford was returning via bus from St. Albans, where he'd been visiting relatives when he vanished. Based on eyewitness accounts, Tedford and 13 other passengers were on the bus at the previous stop before the bus had arrived in Bennington. But when the bus pulled into the station, he had somehow disappeared, His bags were still in the luggage rack, and a bus schedule was found lying open on his now empty seat. The other passengers stated that they didn't see Tedford get off the bus at any of the previous stops, and he wasn't on the bus when it pulled into Bennington. Authorities investigated the disappearance and were convinced that no one had seen anything, and there were no suspicious incidents which had occurred during the bus trip. One strange and interesting fact: it should be noted that Tedford's wife, Pearl, had also vanished under mysterious circumstances a couple of years prior. Now, there aren't many details about his early life, but in 1940, Tedford was listed as a resident in Franklin, Vermont, with his wife, Pearl, who was much younger, her age being 28 while he was 56. The strangeness began following Tedford's return to Vermont after the end of his second round of military service near the end of World War II. Upon his return, he found that Pearl had vanished, no trace of her to be found, and the house the couple had rented in Franklin, Vermont, was found to have been left abandoned. Tedford's family claimed no knowledge as to the whereabouts of the missing wife, and stated the last time they had seen her was as she was on her way to the Amoco gas station in Franklin. There was speculation among the locals that rather than having met with foul play, she had understandably grown tired of waiting for her much older husband to return from war and had simply taken off. Whatever the cause, she was never to be seen or heard from again. Tedford was crushed and moved into the local home for soldiers, where he still lived when he vanished. The next year, on October 12, 1950, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Jepson was the next in the area to go missing. Jepson was last seen in the cab of his mother's pickup truck in Bennington, where she had left him to play while she briefly tended to her pigs. When the mother returned, she found that the boy was gone. She quickly looked for him in the nearby immediate area with no luck, after which she reported him missing, and soon hundreds of volunteers had assembled to help search for the missing boy. Tracking dogs were brought in to aid in the search for the missing boy. The dogs were able to pick up his scent and followed it towards Glastonbury Mountain. However, when the scent was lost at a nearby crossroads, it was thought that perhaps the boy had either been abducted by a stranger or had otherwise accepted a ride in a passing automobile. Paul's father stated that, oddly enough, the boy had talked about visiting the mountain almost non-stop for the last week or so. The area around Glastonbury Mountain was searched extensively for the next several days, but sadly no trace of Paul has ever been found. Then, 16 days after Paul Jepson's mysterious disappearance, a woman named Frida Langer disappeared on October 28, 1950. Frida was camping with several other family members in the forest near Glastonbury Mountain. Langer, then aged 53, along with her cousin, Herbert Elsner, had ventured away from the family's woodland campsite to go on a hike near the Somerset Reservoir. They had managed to hike just a few hundred yards from their campsite when Frida lost her footing and fell into a mountain stream, completely soaking her shoes and clothing. Due to the chilly fall temperature in the mountains, Frida told her cousin to wait while she ran back to their campsite to change into some dry clothes. Her cousin stated that he waited for what seemed like a sufficient amount of time, and when Frida still hadn't returned, he decided to go back to the camp to see if she was okay. However, upon his return, he was shocked to learn that Frida hadn't returned to the campsite at all. She had instead apparently vanished in broad daylight in the distance of a few hundred yards. Frida was reported missing, and over the next several weeks, search parties, with as many as 400 people, including concerned volunteers, law enforcement, firefighters, and military, as well as some aircraft, searched for her and came up empty-handed. Sadly, the search was eventually abandoned. 7 months later, however, on May 12, 1951, Frida's body was discovered near Somerset Reservoir, strangely enough, in an area that had been extensively searched many times previously. The advanced decomposition of her remains meant that no cause of death could be determined, and her case is still unsolved. And then, just as strangely and suddenly as they had begun, the string of disappearances stopped. Frida Langer was the last person to vanish mysteriously during this time frame, and the only missing persons whose remains were found. Other than the geographic locations and time frame, no other connection has been discovered that tie these cases to one another, although some have speculated that a serial killer may be responsible for these strange disappearances. Some blame the Native American curse, or simply claim that the paranormal is to blame, as there appears to be an active portal here into the unexplained. There's also the theory that the area is very unstable due to the unusually chaotic and confusing wind and weather patterns on the mountain, which can cause people to easily become disoriented and then lost as a result. Regardless of what is to be believed, the Bennington Triangle is known to be home to strange and mysterious paranormal phenomena. As well as the aforementioned Bigfoot encounters and the string of mysterious disappearances, there are many, many reports of strange floating orbs of light, sightings of other bizarre forest creatures, and even the occasional UFO sighting. Hello friends, Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. Today, we're going to bring you 6 strange cases of people last seen running into the woods. Now, the missing person epidemic not only affects just the US, but the UK and many other parts of the world. Thankfully, most missing people are discovered alive and well, but some cases remain cold and unsolved, whether that be for a few years or even decades. So, take a walk with me now as we explore these 6 strange cases. Number 6, Craig Freer. Craig Freer was your average 17-year-old. He was going into his senior year at high school and was the co-captain of the school's football team. Craig had also picked up a part-time job and was looking ahead to the future, and his future was bright. There were a few colleges interested in offering Craig a scholarship for his sporting abilities, and the world was truly his oyster. Unfortunately, any chance at a bright future was taken away from him one fateful day in June 2004. His sudden disappearance would turn the lives of his family upside down, and as recently as 2021, the New York State Police are still actively investigating and chasing down new leads. Craig's parents were happy when they heard he'd picked up a part-time job at the Price Chopper supermarket in Glenville, New York. Craig picked up a few shifts, which somehow he managed to fit into his busy schedule. On Sunday, June 27, 2004, Craig walked out of his home for what would be the last time. As far as his parents were concerned, he was headed to work. His mother, Veronica, had seen him carrying his uniform with him to his car. But when Veronica arrived at the supermarket where Craig worked, just a few hours after he'd left for his shift, she was shocked to find no sign of him. She was even more shocked to learn that Craig hadn't been working at the supermarket for quite some time. Whether it was shame, embarrassment, or something else that made Craig hide the fact that he got sacked, we'll never know. His parents were, of course, very upset that Craig had lied to them, and they called Craig's girlfriend to see if she knew where he was. At first, she said she had no idea, but after a second call, she caved in and admitted that he was with her. Veronica gave Craig a stern talking to, telling him that he needed to come home right away and that they needed to have a chat. A sentence that every teenager dreads hearing. Craig said goodbye to his girlfriend and left her apartment located in Scotia, New York. According to his girlfriend, she watched as he walked towards his car, but then at the last minute darted off in the opposite direction. What had scared Craig, and why had he run away from his car? Surely if he was in danger, the best thing to do would be to head to the car and drive away or go back inside. According to reports, Craig ran into the nearby woods, and this is the last confirmed sighting of him. From here, all we have are alleged sightings and a few new pieces of evidence that may finally help us piece this puzzle together. When Craig failed to return home to have a chat with his parents, they waited and waited and waited. As the hours ticked by, it eventually dawned on them that something just wasn't right. Craig was in trouble, but it wasn't like him to run away and leave without telling his parents where he was going. Some people naturally lean towards the flight side of the fight or flight feeling, but his parents knew he would have to come home at some point. But that some point never came. And by 5 p.m. that day, Veronica had picked up the phone and reported her 17-year-old son missing. It appears that the investigators weren't all too interested at first, as is the case with most missing young people. After hearing about their disagreement earlier that day, they believed that Craig just wanted time to cool off and that he would eventually come back. Unfortunately, hours turned into days, and when the investigators found that he didn't have his phone or wallet with him at the time of his disappearance, they agreed that something was wrong and began to further investigate. Those investigators found that Craig had left his wallet and $40 behind at his house, something he would have needed if he planned on spending a few days away from his family. His driver's license was also missing. However, his parents explained that it had been lost before his disappearance, and he was in the process of getting a new one. So, without money, ID, or driver's license, it was clear that Craig wouldn't have gotten very far. All he had was his car, but that had been left abandoned in the parking lot of his girlfriend's apartment complex. So, where was he? Investigators hit a big lead when interviewing witnesses from that day. A group of teenagers came forward to tell the police that they had seen Craig, or at least someone matching his description, walking along the railroad tracks behind his girlfriend's apartment complex shortly after he was seen entering the woods. It appears that they tried to engage him in conversation, but he motioned for them to be quiet and then just kept on walking. This event stuck in their mind due to the strange behavior and the bizarre nature of the incident, and it wasn't until news of his disappearance was made public that they connected the dots. Armed with this new lead, investigators began searching up and down the railway line behind Craig's girlfriend's apartment, but no sign of him was to be found. As the days pressed on and the investigation began to heat up, officers with dog units and ground teams were sent to the area where Craig was last seen. They also sent units to the Mohawk River, wondering whether he'd gotten injured and fallen in. But all of these searches turned up nothing. It seemed as if Craig had vanished into thin air, as if he were here at one moment and then gone the next. Craig's family and friends were all administered polygraph tests, and it appears that everyone passed, although, as we know, polygraph tests are a debatable technique in and of themselves and are not admissible in court in most countries. Hundreds of hours of interviews were conducted, but nothing ever came to fruition. How could a bright, promising 17-year-old just vanish into the woods? Searches continue for Craig and have done so over the years, although they have been majorly scaled back, of course. Craig's family are still desperately seeking answers, of course, and 2 years after he disappeared, the New York State Police became involved in his case. In 2021, a new lead was discovered, and investigators hope this is the clue they need. One of Craig's co-workers at the Price Chopper supermarket told investigators that sometime between June 27th and July 2nd, 2004, he saw Craig in the passenger seat of a car traveling north on Route 50 in Glenville. According to this witness, the car stopped at the traffic lights on Sheffield Road before turning left, and that's when the witness lost sight of the car. This sighting has not been confirmed as of yet. However, it is the largest piece of information in regards to Craig's whereabouts that's turned up lately. Craig's parents have never given up and are hoping that one day they will learn the truth about what happened to their son. Craig Freer is described as a white male, red hair, brown eyes, 5 foot 11 inches tall, and weighs approximately 190 pounds. He was last seen going into the woods behind the Cambridge Manor apartment complex in Scotia, New York, on June 27, 2004. When last seen, he was wearing a white short-sleeved t-shirt, blue jeans or jean shorts, white Adidas tennis shoes with 3 black stripes, and a gold chain with a St. Christopher medallion. Craig also had all 4 of his wisdom teeth removed in April 2004 and may wear his facial hair in a goatee. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the New York State Police at 518-630-1700. Number 5, Jeremy Alex. 28-year-old Jeremy Alex was doing well for himself. He and his girlfriend were in the process of moving in together in Northport, Maine, and he was working as a self-employed landscape gardener in Lincolnville, Maine. When not at work, Jeremy enjoyed skateboarding and playing the guitar, and he spent much of his young adult life traveling around the U.S. and had even gotten involved with the organization Greenpeace at one point. By all accounts, Jeremy seemed like a fun-loving free spirit who was great to be around. In April 2004, Jeremy turned 28 years old and was at a key point in his life. As previously mentioned, he and his girlfriend were getting ready to move in together, and they were excited to start this new chapter in their lives. On April 23, 2004, Jeremy's parents drove from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to his home in Lincolnville, Maine, to celebrate his 28th birthday that had just passed. They sat down for a meal, spoke about Jeremy's upcoming move, and talked about any possible plans he had for the future. Sadly, however, his parents' world would be turned upside down just 24 hours later. On April 24, 2004, the day after Jeremy's birthday dinner with his parents, Jeremy arrived at his girlfriend's house at around 11 a.m. to help her move. From the moment he arrived, she could tell that something was off. The once happy, smiling Jeremy had been replaced with a scared and paranoid person. Jeremy was very frustrated and blurted out to his girlfriend that, quote, bad people were after him. No amount of consoling or comforting could change Jeremy's mind, and he decided to leave instead of staying to help her move. This in itself was incredibly bizarre and very out of character, and the following events of that day would bring about even more questions. At around 5:20 p.m., a woman saw Jeremy running out of the woods and into her back garden on Pound Hill Road, a mile and a half from Jeremy's new home that he was in the process of moving into with his girlfriend. Now, this woman also happened to be an old teacher of Jeremy's, and she recognized him readily. She got closer to him, trying to console him and ask him what was wrong. Again, he rambled off that bad guys were trying to hurt him, and she reported that it appeared as if he was hallucinating. The woman called for her husband, who ran out into the garden and kept Jeremy there while she called the police. The couple noticed that Jeremy was clutching money in his hand. By the time the woman had gone inside to call the police, Jeremy had broken free from her husband's grip and took off running into the woods once more. Other witnesses reported seeing a man fitting Jeremy's description on Route 1, and after this, he has never been seen or heard from again. The police quickly arrived at the scene and took statements from the husband and wife duo. The next day, Jeremy's van was found abandoned near Pound Hill Road at the Waldo County Humane Society. Inside the van were his keys and phone, but sadly, no sign of Jeremy. Searches of the woods where Jeremy's car had been found were conducted, but no sign of him could be found there either. Investigators then began interviewing his girlfriend and found out that Jeremy may have fallen into old habits. Jeremy was in recovery from drug addiction, and according to his girlfriend, in recent months he had unfortunately relapsed. Jeremy's girlfriend also stated that on the day he disappeared, he had been using illicit substances and that he had been experiencing these paranoid states for a while, and that she and his friends were concerned for him. Was Jeremy's disappearance and his ramblings about the bad men substance-related psychosis, or was someone really after him? In September of 2004, a full 5 months after Jeremy disappeared, a contractor in Jackson, Maine, reported seeing a man fitting Jeremy's description, again coming out of the woods. According to this workman, the man he saw was acting erratically and strangely, and couldn't seem to understand what was being said to him. Apparently, this kind stranger offered the man some food, but Jeremy, if it was Jeremy, refused. There was also another possible sighting in October 2004, where someone claimed to have seen Jeremy in the woods in Owl's Head, Maine. After that, Jeremy's case went cold for another 4 years, and then in April, his case took another bizarre turn. His driver's license was found to be in the possession of a couple living in Northport, Maine, the area that Jeremy was in the process of moving to with his girlfriend. According to this couple, they had begun building their house in May of 2004, and over the years, random items that belonged to Jeremy began washing up on the shore near their house. The couple held on to the driver's license and some money that washed ashore, and it wasn't until years later that they connected the dots to Jeremy's disappearance. What's even more bizarre is that their newly constructed home is connected to the woods that Jeremy was last seen running into. Did Jeremy fall off a cliff while running in the woods, or is there something more nefarious at play? His family believes that he likely met with foul play, although they did comment that he knew how to survive in the wilderness. Jeremy Alex was last seen on April 24, 2004, running into the woods in Northport, Maine. He is described as a white male with brown hair and brown eyes, stands about 5 foot 7 inches tall, and weighed approximately 150 pounds. Investigators have stated that Jeremy did indeed appear to be under the influence and confused at the time of his disappearance. Jeremy was known to smoke hand-rolled cigarettes and was last seen wearing an olive green flannel Timberland sweatshirt, blue jeans or brown corduroy pants, tennis shoes, and carrying a red backpack. Anyone with any information regarding Jeremy's disappearance is urged to please contact the Maine State Police at 207-624-7076. Number 4, Willie Hodge. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information surrounding the disappearance of 39-year-old Willie Hodge in January of 2019, but here's what we do know. On January 23, 2019, Willie was last seen by his family as he was leaving his home in the 1100 block of Island Drive in Sumter County, South Carolina. According to the Charlie Project, Willie had an argument or altercation with his mother and left the house upset. This was the last time he was seen by his family. Police records indicate that later that evening, Willie was pulled over at the intersection of Pinewood Road and Columbia Circle during a traffic stop. WLTX News notes that Willie was pulled over for a traffic violation, but what the violation was has never been specified. The South Carolina arrest database does show that Willie has been arrested 5 times previously before his traffic stop in 2019, with offenses ranging from burglary, larceny, driving under suspension, to possession of narcotics and assault. These arrests may or may not be linked to his disappearance. However, it may explain what happened next. As the police pulled him over, Willie jumped out of his car and ran into the woods. Did Willie have a distrust of the police because of his previous charges, or was he scared of getting yet another charge? According to officers, they searched the immediate area for Willie, but there was no sign of him. As the days passed, his car remained abandoned, and they continued in their search for the missing man. Charles Bonner, a senior investigator with the Sumter County Sheriff's Office, told News 19 in February of 2019, "We don't want to get him in trouble because of that. I just want to talk to him and make sure he's okay because he is a missing person. I take these very seriously, so I want to make sure that he's okay." There was also another person in the car with him that night he disappeared. However, this witness has been unable to provide any further information. Willie's mother, Sadie Hodge, told News 19, "In my heart, I don't feel like he's alive anymore. It's just kind of a sense of peace that I have. In a way, it's a good thing, but I still hold out hope. I just want to know he's okay, whether it's here, whether he's found eternal peace. I just want to know he's okay." Willie Hodge was last seen running into the woods after being stopped by police at the intersection of Pinewood Road and Columbia Circle in Sumter County, South Carolina. Willie is described as a white male with brown hair and brown eyes, standing 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighs 140 pounds. Willie has the letters NTAB tattooed on his knuckles, Street on the back of one arm, and Dreams on the other. He also has Thug Life tattooed across his stomach, with the name Sadie over a heart and a tattoo of a woman on his calf. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the Sumter County Sheriff's Office at 803-436-2000 or Crime Stoppers at 1-888-CRIME-SC. Number 3, Terrence Woods Jr. 26-year-old Terrence Woods Jr. was working as a TV production assistant for the UK production company Raw TV in conjunction with the Discovery Channel in 2018 and was out on location in Idaho. Unfortunately, one night while filming, Terrence ran off into the woods and hasn't been seen or heard from since. Terrence was working as part of a 12-person crew who were tasked with filming Gold Rush, Dave Turin's Lost Mine. Filming and production were going well with the crew, following Dave Turin around, seeing what he could dig up in the remote parts of the western United States. Then, on the evening of October 5th, 2018, everything changed. According to Vice, The crew had wrapped up filming for the day in Penman Mine near Oro Grande, Idaho County, when Terrence told two of the other crew members that he had to go and use the bathroom. Then, just seconds later, the associate producer, Simon G., who Terrence worked under, saw Terrence drop his radio and take off running into the trees. Terrence apparently ran down a steep cliff into a forest before disappearing into the thick woods. Those on set called out Terrence's name and desperately tried to catch up with him to see what was the matter, but the area he had apparently run into was rough and unpredictable, according to the crew. The crew spent some time searching for Terrence before realizing that they needed to call it in to the police. At 6:41 p.m., Terrence Woods Jr. was reported missing to the Idaho County Sheriff's Office. Somewhat disturbingly, the Sheriff's Office didn't arrive at the scene to begin the search for Terrence until the next morning. Their excuse was that the call was made at a late hour. This is just one of the disturbing facts surrounding Terrence's case. When the Idaho County Sheriff's Office finally arrived, they sent dog units, ATVs, helicopters, as well as boots on the ground to look for any sign of Terrence. The Idaho County Sheriff's Office found no sign of him. The dogs failed to pick up on any scent, and sadly, after 6 days, the search was called off. The Idaho County Sheriff's Office failed to act quickly in Terrence's disappearance, but they are not the only ones who acted strangely following his vanishing act. According to Valerie Woods, Terrence Jr.'s mother, the first thing Simon said on the phone, and when I met him in the police department, was, "I had high expectations for your son, but when I met him, he didn't stand up to them." Vice ran an article in 2020 about Terrence's disappearance and the allegations of the toxic work culture at Raw TV, and included an interesting detail. The article reads, quoting here, "The original Idaho County Sheriff's Office report, seen by Vice, says that Terrence was having a really hard time emotionally and had a mental breakdown earlier today. When the 911 call was made, the caller, who was not part of the Raw TV crew, alleged that Terrence had been dealing with mental issues throughout the shoot. However, when pushed to confirm these statements by Terrence's family in the weeks following his disappearance, they were retracted." End quote. This article also includes information from Terrence's mother, Valerie. She says, "He was responsible. He wouldn't run away without good reason unless he was scared." The article goes on to say they believe Terrence felt intimidated or mistreated by his colleagues. They say that he wanted to return to his home in Maryland. An ex-Raw TV employee also told Vice there was a laddie culture at the company. There was a toxic undercurrent which made me feel very uncomfortable. There were conversations where they would make disparaging comments about people they were looking to hire. It made me feel quite uncomfortable. With all this information about Raw TV, it still remains to be seen whether they had anything to do with Terrence's disappearance. As of 2020, the Idaho County Sheriff's Office said that Terrence's case is still open but not active, and that they are not actively searching for him. Terrence Woods Jr. was last seen running into the woods near Oro Grande in Idaho County, Idaho, on October 5, 2018, after telling two colleagues that he needed to use the bathroom. Terrence is described as an African-American male with black hair, brown eyes, 5 foot 9 inches tall, and 150 pounds. Terrence has a tattoo of a black oval on the inside of his left wrist and was last seen wearing a light brown jacket and black cargo pants. Anyone with any information is urged to please contact Lieutenant Jerry Johnson of the Idaho County Sheriff's Office at 208-983-1100 and reference case 1810081. Number 2, Lars Mittank. The case of Lars Mittank is perhaps one of the most perplexing disappearances in recent true crime history, and while there are numerous theories surrounding his mysterious disappearance, we are still no closer to uncovering the truth of what happened in 2014. On June 30th of that year, 28-year-old Lars Mittank and a group of his friends traveled from their home in Germany to the Golden Sands Resort in Varna, Bulgaria. This was the perfect party destination for 28-year-old Lars and his friends, and parts of Bulgaria have picked up a reputation over the years for being party hotspots for young European tourists. The sun is blazing, drinks are cheap, and clubs are open all night long, making it the perfect place for young people to go and let their hair down, and that's exactly what Lars and his friends did. The first few days of the holiday went by without incident, with the group soaking up the sun and enjoying everything that the Golden Sands Resort had to offer. Then on July 6th, just a day before they were due to head home, something strange happened. While out at a bar, Lars got into an argument with a rival football fan. Lars was a Werder Bremen fan, while the other person was a Bayern Munich fan. In Europe, they take football very seriously, and for some it's more of a religion than a sport, so it isn't surprising to hear that the argument became heated very quickly. The argument was dissipated after harsh words were thrown around, and Lars left the bar first without his friends. His friends figured that he was likely heading back to the hotel and that they would be able to catch up with him later. It wasn't until the next morning, however, that Lars returned to the hotel room with a ruptured eardrum and an injured jaw. According to reports, his friends gave investigators differing accounts of what had happened that night. Some of his friends said that after Lars left the bar, the men that he had been arguing with earlier jumped him, causing the injuries, while others claimed that the men in the bar had paid a local man to do their dirty work for them. Either way, Lars was left with a pretty serious injury that would kickstart a bizarre chain of events. His friends took him to see a doctor at the airport who confirmed that his eardrum had ruptured and he would not be able to fly until it was healed. Lars was given 500 milligrams of cefprozil to help curb infection and was advised to remain in Bulgaria for a few days. His friends rallied around him, insisting that they would stay with him until he was cleared to fly. But oddly, Lars declined their offer. He insisted that he would be okay on his own, telling them to go ahead, fly back to Germany, and that he would see them again very soon. There were no indications of what was to come, and the events of the next few days would shock everyone. Lars checked himself into another hotel and remained there for just one night. Employees at the hotel reported he was acting very bizarrely and seemed as if he was paranoid and scared of someone or something. During his short stay at the second hotel, Lars also called his mother. In a hushed voice, he panically told her that 4 men were after him. His mother would later tell investigators that the fear in his voice was very real and no amount of consoling would calm him down. After a very restless night's sleep, Lars returned to Varna Airport on July 8, 2014, and visited the office of Dr. Kosta Kostov. Lars' hopes of returning home were dashed, however, when Dr. Kostov reiterated that given his condition, it would not be in his best interest to fly. But Lars decided to ignore this recommendation. He told the doctor that he was willing to accept responsibility for whatever happened to him. Just as the appointment was wrapping up, a construction worker entered the room. Varna Airport was undergoing a lot of construction and renovation work at the time, and it's likely that the construction worker had simply wandered into the wrong room. This situation was more of an annoyance than anything else, but for Lars, it freaked him out. His whole demeanor changed when the man entered the room, and he exclaimed, "I don't want to die here. I need to get out of here." With that, Lars ran out the door of the doctor's office, leaving behind his luggage and bags, and made a beeline for the entrance of the airport. This bizarre escape was captured on CCTV and became the most infamous piece of evidence we have in Lars' case. The CCTV footage shows Lars running, almost as if he's running for his life, through the airport, into the parking area, and then jumping over a fence and running near Highway A2. When Lars failed to return home and make contact with his family, he was reported missing and an investigation was opened. His friends were questioned and the CCTV footage was heavily reviewed. Lars had been exhibiting bizarre paranoid behavior in the days leading up to his disappearance, and investigators began to wonder whether this paranoia was founded upon. Lars Mittank was last seen running out of the Varna Airport in Varna, Bulgaria on July 8, 2014. Anyone with any information is asked to please contact the BKA, which is the Federal Criminal Police Office in that country, at 49151-613-78673. Or as an alternative, you can contact the Varna Police directly at 359-52-611-516. Number 1. Dennis Shepard. 46-year-old Dennis Shepard was described as an energetic and lively person who loved his girlfriend and his family. Dennis worked as a personal assistant in Port Washington, New York, and was doing well in his career and his private life. That was until a sudden onset of paranoia sent Dennis down a dark path. He became convinced that everyone he knew was working with the FBI to conspire against him. One day, Dennis's paranoia boiled over. Dennis was witnessed running door to door asking neighbors to call the United Nations because he wanted to report the conspiracy against him. Dennis told those who opened their doors that his family, neighbors, lawyers, and others in his life were involved in an FBI conspiracy to get him, and that he needed help. This alarmed neighbors, who called the police, and Dennis was involuntarily taken into the Stony Brook University Hospital's psychiatric unit for observation and treatment. During his time in the hospital, Dennis was still convinced that there was an FBI conspiracy against him, and even believed that the officers who had taken him in and the staff who were treating him were in on the conspiracy, and that's why he had been taken in. In reality, Dennis had been taken in for his own safety and well-being, but his paranoia had grown too much and he was unable to make rational decisions. Dennis repeatedly told the staff at Stony Brook, "I want to see how I do without medications," and that he would not be taking medications under any circumstances. He did not believe that anything was wrong, and the hospital was in the process of filing a court order to ensure that Dennis would have to take his medication and get the therapy and help he needed. On May 18th of 2012, Dennis was being transported to the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center for further treatment. He intended to fight the court order once he arrived at the psychiatric center, but he would never make it. According to staff who were traveling with Dennis that day, he simply jumped out of the car and ran off into the woods, never to be seen again. Oddly enough, his disappearance was not reported by medical staff until several hours later, and the Suffolk County Police Department were extremely hesitant to get involved. It became clear that the Suffolk County Police Department did not take Dennis's disappearance seriously, despite the fact that he had been taken into psychiatric care and his notes stated that he was suffering from delusions and possibly schizophrenia. The Suffolk police rested on the idea that Dennis had run away and was hiding from the police, although he had no real reason to do so. Disturbingly, no golden alert, which is for a missing vulnerable adult, was issued when Dennis disappeared, a fact that has greatly angered his family. These alerts have been proven to save lives and have been used in different iterations across countless states. Had a golden alert been issued, the outcome of Dennis' story may have been a lot different than the outcome I'm telling you now. The Pilgrim Psychiatric Center sits across from the Oak Brush Plains State Reserve, a sprawling park of over 813 acres. Is it possible that Dennis ran through the woods and made his way into this reserve? Since his disappearance, little progress has been made in this case, and his family has since filed a $5 million lawsuit against the Stony Brook Institution for allowing Dennis to escape. In March of 2021, a Reddit user named Always Sunny in Upstate made a post about Dennis's disappearance, and the post received an interesting comment. The commenter, who claimed to be Victoria Shepard, Dennis's sister, gave some further insight into her brother's case. She wrote, and I'm quoting here, "This is Victoria Shepard. I am his sister. The police have been of no help at all. He is still missing. His dental records and our mom and another sister's DNA is on record. They did not even alert the police until several hours after he went missing. He was a limo driver and avid bike rider, so he knows Long Island very well. He lived in Nassau County when he went missing, and we lived in Suffolk for many years. He really could be anywhere, but we know no activity on bank accounts, credit cards, or social security number, so that makes us lose hope. Hopefully, one day he will be found. His family misses him terribly, especially his mom. She's been heartbroken since the day he went missing." End quote. Dennis Shepard was last seen running into the woods near the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center in Brentwood, New York, on May 18th of 2012. Dennis is described as a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes, stands about 6 feet tall, and weighed approximately 190 pounds. Dennis may be suffering from schizophrenia, and at the time of his disappearance, he was suffering from paranoid delusions. He was last seen wearing a black t-shirt, tan pants, and tan tennis shoes. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Steve Gargans of the Suffolk County Police Department at 631-852-6110 and reference case number 12-309678. Well, friends, there you have it. What do you think of this half-dozen strange cases where people disappeared after running into the woods? Very strange indeed.
And welcome back. New this morning, a search is underway for a missing duck hunter in Manitowoc. Authorities were called to the Manitowoc River off of West Quarry Road.
We have some breaking news right now at noon. A search is underway at Clendening Lake Marina for 2 missing hunters.
Still missing tonight, a 61-year-old hunter who disappeared in the Pecos Wilderness near Santa Fe Sunday.
The search for a missing hunter in Laurel County continues.
Search for 2 missing duck hunters along the Mississippi River is about to stretch into a second week.
The race is on now to find a missing hunter in Sullivan County. More than 80 first responders are combing the woods right now.
There are innumerable cases of people who seemingly vanish out in the wilds of our world, and it sadly makes sense that some people should go missing here. There are places on Earth far from human civilization, with treacherous terrain, wild animals, and the propensity to confuse and bewilder those who find themselves unprepared or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yet, an alarming number of these disappearances leave behind mysterious clues and snatch away even those of us who are well versed in the outdoors and experienced at being within these unpredictable realms. Here, we'll look at 5 of the more eerie disappearances of experienced hunters and the most seasoned survivalists who have gone out into the wilderness and simply never returned. Number 5, Zeb Hughes and Gunnar Palmer. 21-year-old Zeb Hughes and 16-year-old Gunnar Palmer disappeared on Thursday, December 3, 2020, while duck hunting on the Mississippi River in Warren County, Vicksburg, Mississippi. Zeb and Gunnar set out from the Le Tourneau landing boat dock on what was supposed to be a typical day of duck hunting. River conditions were normal when they hit the water, and despite the chilly 46-degree temperature, the weather was fair. The Mississippi River, aptly named the Mighty Mississippi, sustains over 260 species of fish, with some tipping the scales at over 300 pounds. The river is 11 miles across at its widest point, and its currents are known to be unpredictable, sometimes even under the best circumstances. Zeb and Gunnar's boat was found capsized on December 4th, the day after the two were officially reported missing. Had the Mighty Mississippi turned treacherous too quickly for the young men to react? Along with the pair's boat, searchers found most of the belongings that were inside, but there was no sign of either Zeb or Gunnar, or of the dog that was traveling with them that day. The search went on over the river and the banks for more than a week, with nothing being found by the dozens of search teams, specialized aircraft, or drones. Sometime during the second week, the search efforts were refocused to cover solely the water. Does this mean that Zeb and Gunnar never made it out of the water? While we hope that's not the case for them, searching the river is necessary in the effort to locate them, and it's no small task. On December 24, 2020, Warren County Sheriff Martin Pace told WLBT 3 On Your Side news reporters that Christmas Day would not slow down the search for Zeb and Gunnar. Sheriff Martin assured that himself and his deputies would be on the water all day Christmas Day, continuing the efforts. He is quoted in the WLBT interview as saying, "I think the fact that we have multiple bodies in a moving body of water that's 100 feet deep just adds to the situation." How could 2 young and agile people who are used to being outdoors be so caught off guard by the river? Or is there something other than the Mighty Mississippi to blame for their disappearance? Number 4, James P. Rambone Jr. 51-year-old James P. Rambone Jr. disappeared on September 3, 2003, near the Caniapisco River, south of Kuujjuaq, Quebec, Canada. James was out on a hunting trip with 3 friends. The 4 hunters were knowledgeable about the outdoors, and they were experienced at hunting. James hoped to land a big one that day, and while the group was out, he spotted a large caribou. He took off into the wilderness, hoping to intercept the bull. James never returned to the group from that chase. The other hunters searched and found James' fluorescent orange vest and his camera both near a caribou carcass. There was no sign of his gun, no clothing scraps, the use of tracking dogs, but they all failed to locate him. It was as if James had completely vanished. No evidence was found that suggested James had succumbed to the elements, predatory animals, or even an accident. Pam still holds out hope that James, an epileptic, is still alive. She says, "For all we know, Jim might have developed amnesia caused by a severe seizure. He might be with someone who doesn't know who he is and doesn't realize that he is missing. Something's just not right. You don't just vanish." Number 3. Alan Tice. 52-year-old Alan Tice disappeared in November 2003 while on vacation, a time he planned to spend collecting rocks and hunting mule deer in the upper Missouri River Breaks area of Montana. Alan checked into his hotel without issue on November 22nd and paid cash for part of his stay in advance. Nothing was unusual until November 24, his scheduled checkout date, when there was simply no sign of him. Most of his things were still in the motel room except for his hunting gear, so it was assumed that he must have gone out hunting and never made it back. 2 days later, November 26, Alan was officially reported missing. Authorities began looking for him quickly thereafter. Alan stood 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighed 160 pounds. He was an avid outdoorsman with a good reputation at his job and was known for being a responsible employee. It wouldn't have been like him to miss an appointed checkout time at a motel. It was especially strange when an aircraft search team located his abandoned truck in a wilderness area along the Missouri River, but there was no sign of Alan himself. Strangely, all they found in his truck was an empty rifle case and his boots, which had been left behind and placed side by side. What happened to Alan, and why did he go out into the woods without his boots? No trace has ever been found, and he was declared legally dead in 2011. Number 2. Jeremy Childress. 31-year-old Jeremy Childress disappeared on October 17, 2004 from Trask Mountain in Tillamook County, Oregon, while on an elk hunting excursion accompanied by his co-worker, Shane Louie, and his son, Shane Jr. On October 17, the three guys had spent the day out hunting and enjoying the great outdoors. Once back at camp, they decided to make a trip down the mountain to gather firewood for the night. The trio hopped in the pickup truck, driven by Shane, and made their way down the winding roads, collecting firewood. Traveling back toward camp, they encountered a dense fog that surprised and disoriented them. Driving through it while trying to find their campsite was seemingly getting them nowhere, and after a while, Jeremy told his companions that he believed the camp was beyond a particular stand of trees they passed. Shane agreed to pull over and let Jeremy investigate further. Shane and his son got out with Jeremy and hiked a little ways into the fog, but ultimately stayed behind while Jeremy went ahead solo to confirm whether camp was nearby. The intention was for Jeremy to return soon thereafter with news. As Jeremy melted into the thick fog, nobody could have known that it would be the last time anyone would see him again. Shane and his son got back to the truck and waited about an hour, but when Jeremy didn't turn up, they went for help. When the fog finally lifted, an extensive area-wide search and rescue was conducted, but there was no trace of Jeremy other than a discarded gum wrapper of his favorite brand. Despite the extensive efforts put forth in subsequent searches by Jeremy's wife, Kristen, and dozens of other volunteers, no other signs of Jeremy were ever found. A seemingly odd clue was uncovered, though. A passerby witness who claims to have heard 3 shots fired in rapid succession on the evening Jeremy disappeared, and although this is a traditional SOS signal, it is unclear if the occurrence is connected to Jeremy's case, and it is also said that his friends did not hear the shots. As of December 12, 2004, more than a 4-mile radius from where he was last seen had been searched by many teams, with still no signs coming up. Jeremy's family is understandably devastated by his disappearance, and his 3-year-old daughter, Kelsey, asked her mom over and over in the days thereafter when her daddy was coming home. Number 1. Barnett Barry Zeldin. 74-year-old Barnett Barry Zeldin disappeared on Monday, October 7, 2013, after telling his wife he was planning to put some bait at a deer stand near Chatsworth in the Warren Grove Recreation Area in Barnegat, New Jersey. That's the last time Barry was seen. He took his '92 Chevy Blazer to the recreation area, where he would likely have begun checking his usual hunting and lure spots. He carried corn and molasses to put out for the deer, and had brought his dog along for good company. They left Barry's Mays Landing home and drove to a section of the Warren Grove Recreation Area. Now, the Warren Grove Recreation Area in New Jersey is mostly undeveloped wilderness, perfect for hiking, bird watching, hunting, and the like. The 617-acre is just west of the town of Warren Grove. The land was acquired from the National Park Service in 1972 as part of their Federal Lands to Parks program. Access to the recreation area is limited to several sand roads and old woods roads throughout the area, but there are currently no marked trails. Barry frequented this wilderness and was a strong outdoorsman, avid hunter, and capable survivalist. The weather at the time of Barry's disappearance was overcast, damp, and chilly, both during the night and daytime. Temperatures were around 66 degrees Fahrenheit, with winds gusting to 30 miles per hour. Even so, Barry was equipped with the necessary skills to handle the conditions. When Barry didn't come home or call Monday night, his wife, Janet Zeldin, wasn't really worried at first because he was known to make spontaneous hunting trips that sometimes lasted for several days. Janet said, "I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe he got a deer and he was looking for it. He's very independent." She began calling his cell phone every hour by Tuesday and into Wednesday, but all she got was his voicemail. On Thursday, October 10th, she tried to drive to the Audubon Gun Club, where Barry was a member, but she couldn't find it. The next day, she tried again, this time finding it, and got several members of the club to go out looking for Barry. Wilbur Swales, president of the Audubon Gun Club, said, "A couple of us went out Friday night looking for him, and we couldn't find nothing. Then we went out Saturday, me and 3 other members of the club, and we found his automobile." Barry's 1992 Chevy Blazer was parked at Warren Grove. The keys were still in the ignition, with the windows rolled down, cell phone on the dashboard, and his dog, Taffy, still there waiting for him, having survived 4 days alone by eating the corn and molasses meant for the deer. Janet speculated of the dog, he must have left her to check on the deer stand or to put some apples out, and there was a medical emergency. She does what she's told, so he must have told her to stay put. New Jersey State Police and State Park Police searched for Barry using helicopters and canine teams. Search efforts originally concentrated on the Warren Grove Recreation Area, but expanded closer to the Bass River State Forest, also in New Jersey. By Sunday afternoon, October 13th, 6 days after Barry's disappearance, the authorities called off the official search and rescue operation. Even so, volunteers with Burlington County Canine Search and Rescue went back into the recreation area the following Tuesday and then planned a larger search the following weekend. Janet said at the time, "I know he's good in the woods. That's why I never worried. He knows what he's doing. He's a very avid hunter. He probably could survive out there indefinitely." Barry's daughter-in-law, Debbie Zeldin, said, "It's like he just vanished. His car was found with his dog. She's okay, but we're afraid of what might have happened because he loved that dog. He would have never left her anywhere if he wasn't going to be right back." In November 2013, Barry's wife Janet said, "Every weekend and sometimes during the week, there is someone out looking for him. There have been different rescuers, state troopers, neighbors, friends, and the fire department. In 2 weeks, the shotgun hunters will be going out, and there should be about 1,000 of them pushing for deer. Between the newspaper coverage, TV, and word of mouth, everyone out there will know he's missing and will look for him. As time goes by, I guess I get less hopeful." What made Barry leave his dog Taffy in the Blazer with his cell phone and belongings? Clearly, he only planned to be away for a short time. Did he suffer a stroke or heart attack because of his age and perhaps fall into the dense undergrowth in the area? Was he attacked by a large predatory animal? None of his gear or other belongings were ever located. Only his truck, its contents, and his dog. So, friends, what do you think about these cases? How did all these wilderness experienced people go missing, some with no clues ever to be uncovered at all? These mysterious disappearances are only 5 of a frightening number of missing person cases. Hello, friends. Today we're going to be talking about 5 wilderness disappearances where mysterious disembodied cries for help were heard by search and rescue teams, but the person couldn't be located. You can imagine how these disembodied cries for help would have baffled search and rescue teams when they couldn't locate the missing person who had vanished in the wilderness. Likewise, the person calling out would probably wonder why they couldn't be heard. As we all know, thousands of people go missing every single day in the United States alone, and while some are found safe and sound and return to their family and loved ones, many are never seen or heard from again. How devastating that must be for the people who remain in the dark about their loved one, wondering always what if and what happened. Are they alive? Are they deceased? But what about the people who went missing and are known to have called out for help, to have actually been heard screaming or yelling for someone to rescue them, but were then never found? How does something like that even happen? Surely you must be thinking that if someone is close enough to be within earshot and heard calling for help, then search and rescue teams, volunteer teams, or even just a random stranger wandering about in the area heard them, then how is it at all possible for that person to never be seen or heard from again? Now, while we don't answer to that specific question today, and we as a society may never have all of or even part of the answers to these same questions, let's review some of these cases today. The ones in which people were so very close to being rescued or saved, but then that help never came. What must that have felt like to the person who was lost? Crying out and then hearing people who you think are coming to your aid for who knows how long, knowing that you're being heard and maybe even preparing to get ready to get back home to your family, and then nothing. Search and rescue teams or volunteers move on, possibly walking right past you to go and continue the search for you somewhere else. These are just a few of the many cases we found in which people were actually heard calling for help, but then could not be located. They were never seen or heard from again after that. Number 5, Mitchell Dale Stalling. On June 19, 2013, Mitchell Dale Stalling, known to most as Dale, his wife Deneen, and his parents went to Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado, USA. The 51-year-old Dale decided to go for a hike by himself to the Spruce Tree House ruins. The Spruce Tree House ruins is the third largest cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde and was actually constructed between 1211 and 1278 AD by the ancestors of some of the Pueblo people of the Southwest. This amazing dwelling contains about 130 rooms and 8 kivas, which are chambers where the ceremonies of the Pueblo people were held. This dwelling wasn't discovered until 1888 when 2 ranchers were trying to find some cattle that had gone astray and accidentally stumbled upon this beautiful piece of history. Dale had decided he wanted to see it for himself and took off at around 4:30 p.m. with every intention of returning as soon as he was done. After all, the trail was less than a quarter of a mile long, connecting to the Petroglyph Point Trail, which is a 2.5-mile loop with cliff exposure that takes off right from the Spruce Tree Trail. Several witnesses came forward later and remembered speaking with Dale on the trail that day, but yet he never returned back to his family. It was until 7 years later that his remains were found and returned to his still hopeful and still searching family on September 17, 2020. But now let's talk about the mystery surrounding this horrible tragedy. Here's a little more about what happened to Dale Stalling that fateful day back in June of 2013. Dale and his family left their home in Goliad, Texas in a camper trailer and headed west to Colorado, a place Dale had always wanted to see and explore. He was an experienced outdoorsman and loved to camp and hike, and was also a very avid gardener and was known to spend hours alone at home just spending time and tending to his many plants. He decided a day trip to Mesa Verde National Park was the perfect way not only for his family to spend some quality time together, but also for him to make his dream of seeing the sights in the beautiful Colorado National Park a reality. And so they were on their way. The trail was known to be a bit rough and rugged, so initially the Stallings were only planning to drive to the lookout point and experience the breathtaking scenes from a distance. Dale's parents were elderly, and it's reported that his wife was overweight, so nobody but Dale would have been able to hike the trail very easily. Once they got there, however, Dale being Dale and having his great love of nature and the outdoors, decided to seize the moment and finally have the opportunity he had waited for so long to be there in Colorado, in the Mesa Verde. He just had to get a closer look at the Spruce Tree House ruins. 22 minutes before Dale took off for his hike, the weather conditions were not that good. The temperature was somewhere between 90 and 100 degrees. The terrain was another worry, as it was rugged with steep canyons and mesa tops. The elevation ranged from 6,500 to 8,000 feet. The hike to the top of the trail, Dale estimated, would take about an hour. This was the average length of time for someone in good health to have made it through. Dale was reported missing very soon after he didn't return at the agreed-upon time. His family didn't want to leave much room for anything bad to have happened and got on to finding him right away. The Rangers first thought Dale had just gotten probably a bit off track and told his wife to give him a few more hours, and if he didn't return by then, to go ahead then and report him missing. According to a park public information officer, the park has never had anyone go missing for more than a couple of hours. Once it had indeed been 2 hours after he was supposed to have been back, the park initiated a 2-week-long search and rescue operation, which included around 60 searchers, 2 dog teams, helicopter surveillance, and rope teams rappelling off the cliffs in the Chapin Mesa area. This is where the canine teams had initially shown some interest in the first couple of days of the search, so this is where they decided to begin. The Petroglyph Point Trail follows a cliff base before descending to the mesa in a series of steep sections of switchbacks, which then had some steps cut into the rock. Though he didn't have any water with him on this extremely hot day when he disappeared, Dale did have his cell phone. But after he was determined to have disappeared, nobody could get any kind of response or an answer from him when they tried to reach out. Phone records did show him trying to access his voicemail at around 7 p.m. that night, or at least the phone was trying to access the voicemail. We in this community should make no assumptions that it was Dale at all who tried to do this. For the sake of fact, though, let's move on and say it was him. It was for nothing, though, as the call dropped and never went through. According to Patrick O'Driscoll of National Parks Media Services, the Intermountain region, the majority of Mesa Verde, aside from the few marked trails, is uncharted territory, and therefore technically off limits to hikers. Approximately 5 to 10 people go missing every year in the Mesa Verde National Park, and none of these cases are officially closed, including Dale's, until that person or their body is found. Authorities have shared everything from actual case files to random tips with the family, but Dale's wife, Deneen, sees things much differently than park officials do. She says she is pissed off and feels the search only really lasted for 2 days, and then Dale was just given up on. She stated, "Now that it's been a year, and honestly, the more I reflect on it, I'm just pissed off." Their attitude was, he was there, he was lost, and what are they supposed to do about it? Park officials say, however, that rangers in the park were still searching for Dale 3 months later, though in a bit more scaled-back way. They insist they did this to keep Dale and his disappearance on their radar, so everyone would continue to be on the lookout for him. In 2014, Deneen returned at least 14 times to the park, and is more convinced than ever that her husband had gone missing due to misleading markers and signs in the park, which caused him to accidentally go off trail. She believes he thought he was following all the signs properly, but because they were so confusing, he ended up lost anyway. There is a very interesting account written by a hiker and writer named Jody Peterson, however, that was written in 2013, which details an experience she had while hiking the same trail on the same day as Dale when he went missing. She writes in part, "After an hour of walking, I suddenly heard a weary male voice call, 'I need some help.' I thought of the missing hiker. Perhaps after visiting Spruce Treehouse, he had attempted the trail and run into trouble. I called out several times, but got no response. I thought about going off trail to look, but figured then I'd become victim number 2 if I tried to scramble down those ledges and cliffs. My cell phone had no signal. I hiked back down the trail as fast as I could, and when I found the chief ranger, I told him what I'd heard. Relief washed over his face as another staffer said, 'We thought we heard a call for help in that area yesterday.' They quickly began planning to bring in dogs and more searchers. I left the ranger station and stood looking at the opposite side of the canyon where I'd heard the call for help. I said a silent prayer. When I got back to my western Colorado home the following day, I checked the news, thinking that I'd read that the hiker had been found. Instead, I learned that Mitchell Dale Stalling was still missing, and now 70 people were looking for him. As I write this, it's been almost 2 weeks since Stalling vanished, and the search has been scaled down. A group of us think he's still somewhere in the park, said Chief Ranger Jesse Farias. We've all heard of planned disappearances, but it doesn't smell that way. The odds of him being found alive, though, are basically 0. Perhaps he fell between big rocks in a place where searchers can't see him. Perhaps wind shifts made the dog miss his scent. Now, the question, though, is this. If Dale was heard calling for help by several different people, and searches were immediately put into place and conducted as soon as this was reported, then how did no one come across him again, even hear him again, or find any evidence of him at all. If they thought they heard a call for help in the same area just the day before, then why weren't they still out searching there? That makes no sense. What really happened out there in Mesa Verde? Do the park rangers and other staff of this national park know more than they're saying? This is something to think about, definitely, but most likely something we will never find an answer to. Number 4, Daylene Moke Pua. On February 27, 2015, a 17-year-old named Daylene Pua, known as Moke to his family and friends, decided to go for a hike on the Stairway to Heaven. This is actually the Haiku Stairs in Oahu, Hawaii. These stairs are basically an extremely steep step structure which used to provide pedestrian access to former U.S. Navy communication facilities on the island. This is considered one of Hawaii's most dangerous trails, and Moke was last seen boarding a bus in Waia'ane to get to the spot which he wanted so badly to climb and see the historical sites. Daylene, who lived on the Big Island, was visiting Waia'ane to spend some time with his grandmother. His grandmother, Martha Bear, stated that the teen wanted desperately to climb the trail, which is forbidden on the windward side of Oahu. She told her grandson she had seen on the news that it was closed down and he wouldn't be able to access it. She told him not to waste his time even trying. Martha said, though, that when Daylene boarded the bus and said he was going hiking, she never thought he was really going there, to the Stairway to Heaven trail. She figured she'd already told him that he would get arrested if he tried to go there and climb, and that it was closed down and pedestrian access was being refused. At around 11 a.m., Daylene posted his last ever correspondence when he texted some friends pictures of himself, stating that he was finally there, on the trail of the Haiku Stairs, and was next planning to climb them. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. His family studied the pictures Daylene had sent them from the trail right before he seemingly disappeared into thin air extensively, and there are some that stand out. These are the ones they are desperately trying to get the public's help in identifying. Unfortunately, the more you blow up the images, the more blurry and non-discernible they become. Almost impossible to tell what you're even looking at. Though the family is fairly confident at least one of them is Daylene. They believe they saw a man in the background, far off in the distance of at least one of the other pictures, and theorized that this man was for some reason following Daylene and could have somehow led to his disappearance and possible demise. The search effort included local fire departments, drone operators, community volunteers, and even the U.S. Navy, conducting a land and air search to find the young man, all to no avail. A few days after he was last heard from and reported as missing, Monday, March 2nd, 2 hikers reported hearing cries for help. This information led the fire department to continue their search into Tuesday, March 3rd, 2015. That particular search was suspended the same afternoon, but local volunteers continued to look for Daylene, combing through the mountains, but finding no sign of him. The Haiku Stairs have been closed to the public since 1987, but are still a very popular hike with locals and tourists alike willing to risk fines or arrest. The stairs are in bad shape after heavy rains and powerful storms have damaged them to the point that they've gained a somewhat ominous reputation for being not only treacherous, but possibly deadly as well. Some people believe they should be fixed, restored, and reopened to the public, while others say they should be torn down altogether. The fate of Daylene Moke Pua is still unknown to this day, as is why he wasn't found despite hikers very clearly hearing him calling for help. Was this actually Daylene Pua crying out for help? Again, we will most likely never know. Number 3, Philip Krasik. Yet another unfortunate soul who decided to go out for what seemed like a pleasant and scenic hike and ended up not ever being seen or heard from again, even after being heard screaming or yelling for help, is 30-year-old Philip Krasik from Berkeley, California. Philip told his wife he was headed out for a run in the hills near the Mahler Ranch staging area in Pleasanton Ridge Regional Park, California. He called her once he reached the trail to inform her that it would take him about an hour and to let her know when she could expect him back that day. He was last seen running at around 10:45 a.m. that same morning. Philip's wife reported him missing the same afternoon he had headed out for the run when he failed to return home and hadn't been in contact with her or anyone else to let them know why he wasn't back yet. This was very unlike him by all accounts. Investigators in Pleasanton stated that they had never come across such a bizarre case. Either he got hurt and was only able to call out, or he planned all of this and purposely disappeared, leaving his wife and his life behind and never looking back. This left his family and friends to wonder forever what happened to him and why. According to his family, the latter isn't even an option, as Philip just wasn't that type of man and loved his life and his family. Philip was supposed to meet with his wife to attend a family gathering in Stockton, California. When he didn't show up at the appointed time, his wife immediately knew something was wrong and called the authorities. Philip is said to have left his shirt and cell phone in his vehicle, and although he was running with a smartwatch, it was unfortunately not equipped with GPS. With temperatures rising above 100 degrees Fahrenheit that day in Pleasanton, many were led to immediately begin to speculate that the heat had somehow incapacitated Philip on that day, July 10th, 2021. Now, this didn't make much sense to his family and loved ones, though, as Philip was a marathon runner and was well adjusted to running under such extreme conditions as blaring heat, which might incapacitate most people. His cell phone showed that his route was planned out entirely along very well maintained and manicured trails. Though the park was packed with people that day, not a single credible sighting of Philip has ever been reported. Sergeant Aaron Fountain of the Pleasanton Police Department, who's handling the investigation, said, "I can't even speculate on this one. It's very, very odd." Now to continue, Philip Krasik was a family man with 2 small children and also a graduate of the prestigious Harvard University in Boston, Massachusetts. He was also listed as a third-year student in MIT's Urban Mobility Lab. Philip went missing on a Saturday, and the following Wednesday, a family hiking in the area reported hearing cries in a canyon near the Sunol Post Office. After receiving this tip, 2 people who were involved in the search went out to the area and heard for themselves a man screaming for help near the canyon. Experienced hikers in the search and rescue effort set out to go and see if they could hear the calls and perhaps follow them to try and find Philip, who they presumed it was, and bring him safely back to his family. However, once arriving at the spot where the cries for help were allegedly heard by multiple people at this point, they heard nothing and weren't able to locate Philip either. That same night, the search efforts were officially called off, and Philip hasn't been found as of this video being made almost a month later. Theories run wild as to what happened to Philip Krasik. From demented and murderous drug dealers taking him hostage, to large felines somehow carrying him up trees and feasting, to him just walking off and abandoning his life, which he was said to love so much. However, that's just what these are, theories, as there hasn't been any evidence as to if this was definitely Philip who was heard crying from the canyon for help that fateful day. Again, why didn't the first 2 experienced hikers who were sent out and did claim to have heard at least someone crying for help never find him? This is another case that is completely and totally baffling and runs along the exact vein as the previous 2 and the cases to follow. We'll never know. Surely, if he was attacked and eaten by wild animals, there would have been some sort of trail for either the animal searchers or even the human ones to find and follow, at least leading to some sort of explanation. Signs of a struggle, blood, torn clothing, etc. We'll just have to wait and see on this one. Do have an update here. While this video was in editing, Philip was found deceased. We'll create a new case update video very soon to discuss this with you. Philip, rest in peace, my friend. Number 2, Linda Ortega. On September 22nd, 2012, 53-year-old Linda Ortega left her home in Blackwell, Oklahoma, and headed out to the woods in the Arkansas Ozarks near St. Joe. Linda was with her brother, and they were visiting with her sister when, somewhat ironically, her brother offered to take her into the woods and teach her some survival skills. She somehow became separated from him and ended up lost in the woods for 5 days. The story she told of her experience is strange to say the least. However, in this community, if you clicked on this video or you're aware of all the strange things happening in the woods, besides all the bizarre deaths and disappearances, and if you've been paying attention at all and can clearly see something is wrong with not only the things mentioned above, but also with the reports and stories of encounters and experiences had by the people who were lost for however long in whatever part of the 700 million acres of forests and woodlands in the United States alone, then you'll understand why it was absolutely necessary that we tell Linda's story here. Now, as soon as she was reported missing, a search was mounted, and almost every single resident of St. Joe, which is a tiny town of not even 200 people, and various other volunteers from throughout the county set out to find the missing woman. She was eventually found, relatively unharmed, and picked up by an all-terrain vehicle driven by some of these volunteers. Linda was lucky enough to have only sustained some minor cuts and bruises, but what happened to her affected her psychologically, and it was definitely a strange story she had to tell. Chief Deputy Dwayne Pierce stated that when she came out of the woods, she wasn't right about her head. That's a quote. Miss Ortega reported that she had survived by eating wild berries, watercress, hazelnuts, and anything else she could find which she knew was edible. She also drank water from the creek. At night, she huddled on the freezing cold ground underneath trees for shelter, praying for someone to come and finally find her. She also repeatedly thanked her brother and insisted she never would have survived without the knowledge he had just been teaching her about how to survive in the wild. The strangest and scariest part of the entire 5-day ordeal, though, was what Linda said she'd experienced while out there, lost and alone, cold and afraid, in the unknown woods and trails. She claimed that while she was out there, especially at night, she would see other people there. They would be walking around her along the trails or even right there in the thick of the woods. She would ask them for help or try to get their attention, maybe even ask one of them if they could point her in the direction of safety. However, not a single one of these people even acknowledged her or looked in her direction. She claimed people were even hiding behind the bushes like they didn't want her to see them. Now, while in the hospital, she did admit that perhaps some of the berries she had eaten caused some kind of mild hallucination. She wasn't sure. She claimed she had managed to stay with her brother for 3 days before becoming separated from him and knew what she should and what she shouldn't eat when trying to survive. She's very consistent in her story. Think about the people hiding in the bushes. These people definitely weren't part of any kind of search party. Why would people trying to find a lost woman hide so she couldn't see them? More than that, why would others walk right past her and then try and hide as though they were playing some kind of strange hide-and-seek game, hiding in plain sight? Is this finally the proof that there are, in fact, strange people who live in the woods who either don't know how to interact with other people or just don't want to, especially other people who aren't like them or who aren't from where they're from? Is this proof of ferals, wild men? How does this all tie in with strange missing person cases and even deaths we see, which are becoming so much more common year after year in the woods? Is this what we should be paying attention to when out searching for the above-mentioned missing? There was a statement made by the doctor Linda saw after being taken to the hospital when she was rescued, which validates her sanity. She was not insane. How much more interesting that she was berry picking when she ended up being separated from her brother after 3 days of staying right next to him. As we all know, this is a very common theme among the missing people in the woods, the berry picking, or berry patches in general. But there are those who are found, and then those who seem to be forever lost. Linda is not the first person, or more specifically, the first woman, to report things like this while either lost or, for whatever reason, wandering the woods alone. There are many other reports of women being followed or even chased by what they referred to as men while being lost in those same woods. This is also very common in the East along the Appalachian Trail. Think back to the story of little Dennis Martin and how a family out for a hike or camping trip saw what they referred to as a wild man carrying something which looked like a small child over its shoulder. There are also several park rangers in the United States, Dwight McCarter among them, who have come forward since retiring and tell stories of wild men living and even hunting in the woods of our national parks and general forested areas of our country. Is this only going on here in the United States, though? Not at all. There's one specific report we covered in an early video about wild men and feral humans in the woods where at least one park ranger was attacked by one of these people. Now, luckily, Linda was able to keep her wits about her despite what must have been petrifying fear, and she made a full recovery after her harrowing ordeal. Number 1, Naomi Lee Whidden. On November 25, 1994, Dwayne Whidden decided to take his son, age 6, and 2 daughters, ages 2 and 3, for a hike in the Chattahoochee National Forest. He parked the car at the base of a large mountain there at the trailhead, unloaded his children, and off they went for a day of family fun together. Dwayne and his 3 kids hiked about 1.5 miles up an old logging trail and into the deep wilderness of the forest. Later on, when recounting the incident of what happened and how Naomi had come to be lost in the woods, he stated, "They," meaning his children, "were in my full view, my sight and hearing, and then she was gone. He stated that they were all looking for signs of animals when suddenly Naomi, only 2 years old, just simply vanished. There was never any explanation we could find of what actually happened and how it was possible a 2-year-old little girl, in full view of her father no less, disappeared faster than he could finish blinking. It's like she blinked right out of existence. Local authorities brought in bloodhounds and search teams from the surrounding counties to aid in the search for the small girl. Teams of volunteers and search and rescue headed out well into the middle of the night looking for Naomi and calling her name, but to no avail. She was seemingly nowhere at all. Now, approximately 25 hours after she first disappeared, a man named Kip Clayton was searching the outer fringes of the search area he and his team were assigned to when he said his intuition, that old gut instinct, pushed him forth to go and search another 250 yards forward, leaving the official search area he was looking in. But that's when he found her. Laying next to a large log, face down and unresponsive in mud, muck, and leaves, was 2-year-old Naomi Whitten. He picked her up and she let out a small moan. She was freezing cold, her body at a dangerously low temperature, and Kip ran as fast as he could with Naomi barely breathing in his arms, the approximate mile back to the command post. Naomi was rushed to the nearest hospital, and she was only semi-conscious and in very critical condition when she arrived. Now, while eventually she fully recovered and managed to survive her ordeal, many questions remain about what exactly happened to her. As mentioned before, where Naomi was found was only about 250 yards away from where the searchers would have been screaming and yelling her name the night before, all throughout the night. Why didn't Naomi respond to them at all? Why didn't she alert them in any way as to where she was so they could go and help her? It isn't possible that she was face down in the mud the entire time, or she couldn't have survived. Surely she would have suffocated. So why didn't she respond? Did she not hear them? If she couldn't hear them, why not? Take into account when trying to understand these things, how close this disappearance was to the Great Smoky Mountains and how many children not only have disappeared there, but were found face down on the ground. Usually the ones closest to Naomi's age are found this way. Sometimes, though, it's too late. Naomi was very lucky to have survived. Also, why doesn't a simple Google search turn up more information about this case? Other than one document, there's not any mention of this online anywhere. Hello, friends. Today's episode, we've got something a little different. We're looking into some strange cases where families disappeared. Join us. Now, we see so many cases of people going missing all over the world. In the woods and out, there are people just vanishing, seemingly into thin air, and without a trace or shred of evidence left behind. We aren't talking here about cases that can easily be explained away, or where there may be some type of reasonable or rational explanation for multiple people, families mainly, going missing all at the same time. These are only some of the cases where entire families, most of them just out together to make some memories and with every intention of ending up back in their homes when the adventure was over, only they were never seen again. They never made it back home. Where they ended up and what happened to them has never been adequately explained, if an attempt was made to explain it at all. Come and take a walk with us again, folks, and this time keep your eyes peeled and your ears open, and see if anything here sounds familiar to you. Perhaps you and your family were out one day doing the exact same thing as the following people were, and maybe you came across something strange too. Only, in the end, everything worked out for you, and you made it back safe and sound. Here are just a few examples of families of people vanishing without a trace. First up, we have the Roberts family. John Roberts and his wife Julie Englehart, both 49, and their 11-year-old daughter Brooke Roberts went missing on April 6, 2019, from Hesperia, California, in the United States. The family had lived in Hesperia, but in 2017 had moved to John's hometown of Ozark, Alabama, and then back to Hesperia again in 2019. The trio were staying in a Motel 6 while the parents looked for work and a more permanent residence. Julie had a phone conversation with an unnamed relative on the 6th of October 2019, where she stated she had found a job cleaning used trailers for an unknown business in the Hesperia area. She also told the relative that the family was in the process of moving to Spring Valley Lake. She was excited about the new job and the move and seemed to be in good spirits. Nothing struck the relative as odd or wrong about the call, and after a brief conversation, they hung up and went about their respective lives. Only this would be the very last time anyone has heard from any member of the family. Julie was supposed to call the relative the next day, but the call never came. There's no further information about this case and no news since that last phone call. The family's whereabouts are still unknown to this day. Detectives are seeking contact from anyone who may have information on the whereabouts of John, Julie, or Brooke, and are asked to contact Detective Jason Schroeder at the Hesperia Sheriff Station on 760-947-1500. Next, we have the disappearance of Alan and Terry Westerfield. On September 12, 1964, brothers Alan and Terry Westerfield vanished without a trace. Alan was just 6 years old and Terry was 11. On this day, their stepfather, Carl Bach, dropped the boys off in front of the Broadway Theater on Hay Street in downtown Fayetteville, North Carolina. The boys were planning on seeing a double feature, but when Carl came to pick them up at the agreed-upon time, the boys were nowhere in sight. It was just about dusk, and alarmingly, there was no sign of the young boys. Earlier in the day, the boys' mother, Margaret, had left them in the care of their regular babysitter, a woman named Barbara Temple, so she could go to work. When she returned home, she found that Miss Temple had been dismissed by the boy's stepfather, Carl Bach, whom she was separated from at the time. Carl explained he had dropped the boys off to see the double feature at the movie theater. Upon hearing this, the pair began to argue, which led to Margaret storming out of the house and heading to nearby Fort Bragg to drink at the NCO Club. When she returned home, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and her children still weren't home. Margaret then confronted Carl, and he explained to her how he'd gone to the theater at approximately 7:45 p.m. to pick the boys up and bring them home, but could find no trace of them. He said he had waited there at the theater until about 9:30 before considering they may have walked home or that their mom had picked them up instead. Immediately upon hearing this, Margaret called the police and reported her sons as missing. There were many discrepancies found in Carl Bach's story, including his own girlfriend at the time who worked at the theater, telling investigators she did not remember seeing the two boys at the theater that night. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, one of Terry's friends had come over and asked if he could come out and play, to which Carl informed the child that Terry was being punished and could not come outside at the moment. Also, Miss Temple, the babysitter who Carl sent away, claims she insisted that she stay with the boys until their mother Margaret returned, but Carl insisted even more that she leave and said he would care for the boys until their mother returned. Eventually, Barbara Temple gave up the argument and left as she was told. Margaret, Carl, and at least a dozen other people were brought in for questioning, but nothing ever came of any of it. In the year 2000, when the case was being looked at again, it's been reported that Carl Bach was brought in and was at first incredibly nervous. However, when he was told he wasn't being charged with anything, he suddenly became arrogant and uncooperative with the authorities. So, what happened to these two boys? While many believe the stepfather was involved somehow in their disappearance and that he was somehow looking for a way to get his revenge on their mother, Margaret, for ending their relationship, and while no evidence points toward anything he said about dropping them off at the theater that night or picking them up could be confirmed, the fact remains that these two little boys were never found. No trace of them, and no evidence showing one way or another what possible fate could have befallen them. To this day, no one has ever been charged with anything, and police are apparently no closer to solving this, North Carolina's oldest missing person case. Now we have the Salomon family. On October 13, 1982, Stacy Pearman, one of the neighbors of the Salomon family, called the police when she noticed the family's pool was overflowing in their backyard. She and her mother went and knocked on the door first, but when nobody answered, they became concerned. When the police walked into the home that day, they were not expecting what they found. There was no one inside the residence, but everything seemed perfectly normal. A bit too normal, actually. Even the bed in the master bedroom was made up beautifully, and there seemed to be nothing out of place. This was, of course, upon first glance. As the investigators looked a little deeper, they found 14-year-old Michelle Salomon's bedroom in absolute disarray. Her bed frame was broken, the bedding was missing, and there were some spots of what looked like blood on her mattress. Elaine Solomon, her husband Saul, and their 14-year-old daughter Michelle and 9-year-old son Mitchell were all missing. Upon interviewing friends and other family members of the Solomons, investigators found out that Elaine Solomon never even made her bed to begin with, so the fact that it was made so perfectly that day, at the time of the disappearance, was deeply disturbing, according to cousin and best friend Doreen Laffer. After a brief but thorough investigation, nothing was found that alluded to where the family could have gone, and they were never found. After suffering nightmares for years, Stacy Perman decided to investigate the mystery on her own. She found a man named Harvey Rader, a man who had attended a car auction with Saul the night of he and his family's disappearance. This man's story was said to be riddled with inconsistencies and full of what she called flat-out lies. Harvey was also linked to 3 other missing person cases. At the end of the day, however, no arrests have ever been made, and the facts in this case are few and far between. Theories aren't hard to come by, but it remains to this day that the Solomon family disappeared, seemingly without a trace, into thin air that night, so long ago, in October of 1982. A whole family, a mother, father, daughter, and son, just poof and gone. How does this even happen? We'll let you be the judge. Next up, we have Simon Cadwell, Chantal McDougall, and their daughter Leila. In July of 2007, Simon Cadwell, his wife Chantal, and their daughter all vanished without a trace from their southwestern Australian home in Nannup, Perth. The family were renting a home, and a man named Antonio Popic lived on the property in a caravan. Chantal's father, Jim McDougall, reported his daughter and her family missing in October, when he was told there had been no sign of them, and nothing but a note that said "Gone to Brazil" stuck to the front door of the rental home. He stated, "After a few weeks, I was a bit suspicious we didn't hear, so I actually contacted overseas where they were supposed to be, and there was no record. So I got really worried and contacted missing persons." Antonio Popic had also gone missing in November of that same year, a month after Simon and his family were reported as missing. Mr. Popic's brother reported him as missing as well. Investigators found that none of the 4 missing persons' passports had been used, nor had their bank accounts or credit cards. Nothing to indicate they were on a simple vacation, as the note left on their front door had alluded to. Acting Sergeant Fiona Capron said they had settled their lease, and it seems they left in quite a hurry, but left no sign where they could have gone. None of the 4 had ever used their cell phones again either. It's a huge mystery as to where any of them could have possibly ended up, or why. Sergeant Capron stated, "As far as we know, a couple of days before they went missing, they sold the car that Chantal owned. They left their property in their house at Nannup, and they haven't been seen since." Simon Cadwell is said to have been a very charismatic cult leader, and therefore the search for the family and their friend had led to investigations into whether or not they had run off to join some kind of religious sect. Though many reports have come in leading the police to think that this may very well be the case, no conclusive evidence has ever come to light making it a fact. The police have also issued a national missing persons alert and have continued working on the case and following up with any and all leads, regardless of how trivial, that still come in to this day. So what happened to this entire family and their lodger? How could 4 people just vanish into thin air? This case also has so much rumor and speculation surrounding it, but at the end of the day, when basing opinions solely on fact and evidence, there is almost nothing to go by, and their whereabouts remain unknown. Now, while all the cases we've discussed here today contain different circumstances, and the people come from all different walks of life and time frames, one absolute fact remains constant and the same. Every single one of them seemed to simply vanish from the face of the earth, never to be seen or heard from again. The fate of not knowing is sometimes said to be worse than actually knowing the friend or loved one has been deceased or what actually became of them. In these cases, and so many more across the world, the rumor and speculation that we mentioned earlier tend to twist the case and bend it one way or another, sometimes even turning it into something which cheapens the memories of the missing. Let's try and not do that here, folks. Let's keep it respectful and continue to not only pray for the missing and their loved ones, but also to come forward with any and all information, no matter how small and inconsequential it may seem to us, to the proper authorities, in hopes that some closure can eventually be provided, and justice, if necessary, to the families and friends of these, the lost people of our world. Some very, very strange disappearances indeed. I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. As always, be good to yourselves and each other. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you just a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.